Hi guys. Tonight, we drift back through time to the gentle hush of an 18th century dawn in rural France. The light is still a pale shimmer, just brushing over the fields, and the world smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and animals stirring. You can almost hear the slow stretching of a rooster as he lets out his ragged crow. There are no alarms, no buzzing phones, only the rhythm of nature reminding you that it is time to rise. You probably will not survive this world for long if you were dropped into it, though, because comfort is rare, and the small luxuries you take for granted simply do not exist here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are listening right now, tell me your location and what time it is where you are. I always love to know where in the world you are drifting off from. Now, dim the lights and let the story carry you away. You open your eyes on a straw mattress. It scratches your skin a little, and the blanket is coarse wool that smells faintly of smoke and sheep. A single candle stub trembles on a wooden shelf, its wax pooling into the grain. You can hear the slow breathing of others in the room. Maybe a child stirs, maybe an old parent snores gently. The house is one room, simple and dark. The floor is hard-packed earth. In the corner sits the hearth, cold now, but the ashes promise warmth when the fire is coaxed back to life. Outside, the morning is misty. You step into a world so quiet you can hear the creak of wooden wheels somewhere far away. The air tastes of dew and dung, and your bare feet sink into damp straw scattered at the threshold. You live in a village that might hold 200 souls, if you count the chickens. Beyond the cottages lie endless fields of wheat and rye, the lifeblood of France. The smell of bread is rare here because flour belongs more often to taxes than to bellies. The day starts early because daylight itself is a kind of currency. Candles are expensive, made from tallow or beeswax, and you save them for prayers or emergencies. The rooster is your clock. Church bells are your calendar. When the first toll echoes across the hills, you know it is time to begin. You fetch water from the well. The bucket is heavier than it looks, and the handle bites into your fingers. The cold splash on your arms wakes you more than coffee ever could. No one drinks water without worry. It carries more than thirst, it carries disease. So you add wine, or cider, or beer, even for the children. It sounds shocking now, but weak alcohol is safer than water itself. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is little more than bread crusts softened in milk, maybe with a sliver of cheese if the cow has been generous. For most peasants, the meal is silent, a private prayer of survival. You eat, then cross yourself, and step into the fields. The sun rises over your back, spilling gold across furrows. You can hear the rhythmic scrape of hoes, the murmur of neighbours, the steady breathing of oxen. Work begins before words do. You bend and lift, until your muscles forget the difference between movement and exhaustion. This is not romantic pastoral life. This is endurance in slow motion. A mainstream historical fact slips through your thoughts. About 4 out of 5 French people in the 18th century live in the countryside. Most are peasants, bound to land they do not own, labouring under taxes that feel more like punishment than duty. The weight of the king's reach stretches even here, invisible but constant. The tile, the gabelle, the tithe, you may not know the words, but you feel them in your back every time you haul another bundle of hay. There is a quirky truth you might not expect. Some villagers believe that early morning dew has healing powers. Women sometimes collect it in cloths to wash their faces, believing it brings beauty or luck. You try it once, just to see, and the coolness feels like a secret blessing. Historians still argue whether such rural rituals were truly superstition or simply ways to make hard lives feel magical. By mid-morning, the village stirs louder. The blacksmith's hammer starts to echo. Smoke rises from chimneys, curling like grey ribbons. The clatter of hooves on cobblestones tells you that someone from town is passing through, perhaps a merchant, perhaps a messenger, carrying news that may take days to reach Paris. News moves slower than seasons here. The church bell rings again, its sound heavy with authority. Religion fills the air like mist, constant, comforting, inescapable. You glance at the chapel on the hill, its door always open, its candles forever flickering even when no one prays. You make the sign of the cross without thinking. Habit is stronger than belief. You pause at the edge of a field to catch your breath. Your palms are rough and nicked, your nails dark from soil. There is something strangely meditative about this labour. The rhythm dulls thought, and the quiet allows reflection. You think about the nobles who own the land, the men who ride past in clean boots and powdered wigs. You rarely see them, yet they are the reason you work. The irony does not escape you. Around you, the countryside hums with life. Bees hover near clover patches. A shepherd's whistle cuts through the wind. The scent of hay blends with manure, sour yet honest. You can almost taste the dust. There is no escaping nature here. It clings to your clothes, your hair, even your dreams. You notice how people greet one another. A nod, a few words, always the same ones. Gossip travels fast, but news arrives slow. You might hear about a royal wedding months after it happens, or a war years later. The monarchy is a distant sun, brilliant, unreachable, and yet it decides your weather. At midday, when the sun burns too hot, you retreat for a short rest. You sit beneath a tree and look out at the land that owns you as much as you work it. You imagine Paris, though you have never seen it. You picture streets paved with gold, women in gowns that sweep the ground, men who wear swords for decoration. You think of the king at Versailles, dining under chandeliers, unaware of how the earth feels beneath bare feet. Still, you find small joys. The laughter of a child chasing a chicken, the smell of bread baking somewhere close, the cool stream on your wrists. Life is not fair, but it is familiar. That, somehow, makes it bearable. As dusk begins its slow descent, the sky turns the color of wine. You know the work is far from done, but for now, there is a sense of peace. You walk home past rows of cabbages, past stone walls covered in moss, past neighbors nodding goodnight. The world softens in the fading light, and the smoke from a dozen chimneys rises like prayers. You lie again on the straw mattress, muscles aching but heart steady. The candle flickers low. Outside, the frogs begin their chorus, and you wonder what will tomorrow bring. Maybe rain, maybe taxes, maybe nothing at all. But for tonight, you have survived another day in 18th century France. The morning deepens into motion. You stretch, feeling the pull in your back, the ache that never quite goes away. The world around you wakes in slow ripples. Somewhere, a mill wheel creaks. Somewhere else, a cart jolts into a rut, spilling curses and a few stray apples. The village of the 18th century begins its day not with haste but with habit, shaped by the rhythm of work that feels older than time. You step outside again, and the air has shifted. The mist is thinning, the light gentler now, streaking through the branches of apple trees. The road that cuts through the centre of the village is little more than mud lined with stones. The recent rain has left puddles that mirror the sky, and chickens pick delicately through them. You lift your skirts or trousers to avoid the worst of it, though it hardly matters. You will be covered in dust or muck by noon anyway. The roads, if you can call them that, connect lives and destinies, but they are treacherous. A traveller heading toward town must battle more than distance. There are holes deep enough to snap a wheel, bandits waiting in the forests, and tolls at every bridge. Each gatekeeper takes his coin, and you can almost hear the clink of copper echoing through your purse. If you are poor, you travel on foot. If you are lucky, perhaps you can afford to hitch a ride on a merchant's cart, wedged between sacks of grain and a goat that eyes you with suspicion. The morning chores are relentless. You might begin with tending animals, checking the cow, or sweeping away the night's debris from the doorstep. In towns, shopkeepers unlatch their shutters, and the sharp scent of vinegar used to scrub tables hangs in the air. Bakers are already at work. The smell of fresh loaves floats through narrow lanes, taunting those who cannot afford them. You hear hooves clattering, metal shoes striking stone, and the deep rumble of wagons pulling into the square. In the countryside, the routine feels simpler, but harsher. You collect eggs, patch fences, and prepare for the fields. The rhythm of labour is steady, quiet, almost meditative, if you forget that it is endless. You wash clothes by hand, the water so cold your fingers turn numb. The wooden washtub thuds rhythmically as you twist and scrub, the sound echoing in your bones. The soap, made from lye and animal fat, burns a little, but you ignore it. You rinse each piece and hang it to dry, praying the weather stays kind. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Most peasants in 18th century France owned very little, often a few simple tools, a handful of livestock, and their faith. The vast majority lived on rented land, paying dues to both the landlord and the church. Your daily routine was not merely survival, it was tribute, a constant reminder of your place in a delicate social machine that ran on hierarchy and hope. Yet, amid the routine, There are flashes of absurdity that feel almost humorous. A quirky tidbit. People believed that placing a rusty nail in a cow's water trough could protect the herd from sickness. Iron was thought to hold strength and ward off evil. You smile at the thought, picturing someone earnestly dunking old nails into a bucket, trusting the metal more than medicine. Historians still debate whether such habits were superstition or a primitive form of observation, the first glimmers of chemistry hidden in folklore. You walk toward the main road, balancing a basket on your hip. The weight of it is familiar, an extension of yourself. In the distance, you can see the silhouette of a farmer leading oxen, their bodies massive and slow. Dust rises from their hooves like smoke. The sound of their bells marks the rhythm of the land. The road itself is alive. You pass a woman with a bundle of firewood, her face lined and proud. You pass a child running barefoot, holding a stick like a sword. A beggar calls out softly, hand trembling, voice barely above the buzz of flies. You do not stop, though guilt tugs at you. There is not enough to give. As the hours creep on, the roads become busier. Merchants trundle in from nearby towns, shouting greetings, offering everything from candles to saltfish. The clamour grows, the smells sharpen. You can almost taste the mingling scents of tar, sweat, and bread. Somewhere a horse snorts impatiently, shaking its mane. Somewhere a woman argues over the price of apples, her voice sharp as vinegar. You notice that the social world reveals itself most clearly in these small moments. The wealthy ride past in covered carriages, their faces hidden behind curtains. The poor step aside, hats in hands, bodies bent in reflexive respect. No one questions it. This is how the world has always been. But there is a flicker of thought at the back of your mind. How long can such order last? You push the question away. It feels dangerous even to think it. A dog trots past, tail wagging, proudly carrying a bone much too large for him. You watch him disappear down the lane and wonder whether animals understand their lives better than humans do. You stop at the well again, its rope frayed, its stones slick from centuries of hands. Someone has tied a bunch of herbs above it, rosemary and sage, to keep away bad spirits, or maybe just to mask the smell. You draw up the bucket, the wooden handle squealing, and the water rises, shimmering with light. You drink carefully, feeling the chill slide down your throat. The world seems briefly clear, your reflection rippling on the surface. By now the sun is climbing higher, and the first real warmth of the day settles across your shoulders. The air buzzes with insects. Somewhere, a bell chimes the hour. The streets hum with motion. You can hear laughter from the baker's shop, a snatch of song from a passing cart driver. Life, for all its hardship, has rhythm and beauty in its persistence. You wipe your hands on your apron and glance toward the church again, its tower casting a long shadow across the square. The bell rings once more, a reminder of time's slow passage. You think about how the world measures hours differently now, but here, time is still tethered to light and labour. You walk back through the muddy streets, watching the reflections tremble in puddles. The smell of smoke, manure, and bread mixes into something oddly comforting. You realize you could find your way home blindfolded, just by scent. A rooster crows again, late but proud. Children dart through the alleys, laughing, chasing one another with sticks and shouts. You smile, feeling the faint tug of tiredness behind your eyes. The morning has stretched long, and your body is already counting the hours until evening. You pause before entering your cottage. The fields beyond the village glow with promise. Somewhere out there, others are bending over ploughs, singing under their breath, sweating in rhythm with the soil. It is a hard life, but it is also a steady one. Every dawn brings the same pattern, every dusk the same relief. You take one last look at the road, the mud, the wagons, the passing faces. This is your world, uneven, unclean, but undeniably alive. You breathe it in deeply, the scent of wet earth and possibility. Then you turn toward the door, ready to face whatever the rest of the day demands. The smell of smoke and bread clings to the air as you duck back inside. The morning's labour has given way to hunger, the kind that feels heavy and slow rather than sharp. You look around the single-room cottage, hoping for something to fill the emptiness gnawing inside. Breakfast, if it can be called that, waits on the rough-hewn table, a small crust of bread, yesterday's milk, and a wedge of cheese so hard it might double as a tool. You tear a piece from the loaf, its centre dense, its edges tough from being baked days ago. The bread tastes faintly sour, dusted with the memory of ashes from the communal oven. For most people in 18th century France, bread is not just food, it is life itself. You chew slowly. Knowing this simple act links you to millions who do the same every day. There is something sacred in the routine, even if it feels ordinary. If you are poor, your bread is coarse, made from rye or barley, grey and heavy. If you are rich, you eat white bread, soft and delicate, baked from fine wheat flour. The difference might seem small, but in this world, colour and texture can define class more clearly than clothing ever could. You dip the bread in milk to soften it. The milk smells slightly off, and you wrinkle your nose, but waste is unthinkable. Nothing is thrown away here. Even crumbs are swept carefully into a wooden bowl for the chickens. Hunger has taught people to be creative, and desperation has made them disciplined. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Before the French Revolution, bread often made up more than half of the average person's diet. When grain prices rose, riots followed. The price of a loaf could decide peace or chaos. You can almost feel the tension rising with each coin spent at the market. The room around you glows faintly from the fire you've rekindled. The scent of smoke curls up the chimney, mixing with damp straw and the faint sweetness of drying herbs that hang above the hearth. You feel a pang of envy for those who can afford butter or jam to brighten their morning meal. For most, luxury is not abundance but variety. A different taste is worth celebrating. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. In some French villages, families still believe that if you drop a piece of bread, you must pick it up, kiss it, and bless it before setting it aside. Bread is not just food, it is sacred. They say it carries the body of Christ in memory, and treating it carelessly invites misfortune. You remember doing this instinctively as a child, long before you understood why. Historians still debate whether this ritual was rooted in faith or habit, a blend of religion and rural reverence that blurred the line between superstition and respect. You finish your meal and glance at the small window. Outside, a neighbour passes, her skirt brushing the mud, a wooden spoon tucked into her apron like a weapon against hunger. She waves, and you nod. The village hums again, everyone moving with quiet purpose. A boy runs past carrying a bucket of milk, sloshing it so that white trails follow his steps. You remember market days when breakfast smells stronger, when vendors fry dough in lard and the scent floats through the air like a promise. You think of that greasy sweetness melting on your tongue, but those mornings are rare. Today, you settle for what you have, and there is comfort in acceptance. Your hands are rough from work, the skin along your knuckles cracked. You rub them absently against your skirt, leaving faint smudges of flour. You remember your mother doing the same thing, her hands always busy, always worn. Time moves differently here, measured not in hours but in chores. Each task folds into the next, until the day becomes a single, unbroken motion. You hear the low murmur of conversation outside. Two men stand near the well, discussing taxes, harvests, and rumours about new grain laws. Their voices are low, cautious. Everyone has heard stories of officials who confiscate grain to prevent hoarding, but in truth, the poorest rarely have enough to hide. You wonder what they would say if they knew how many children go to bed with only air in their stomachs. The fire snaps, pulling your attention back inside. You add another log and watch the flames climb. Heat fills the small room, and for a moment, the world feels safe again. Your belly is not full, but it is quiet. The sound of the wind outside softens, blending with the gentle crackle of burning wood. You think about breakfast in the grand houses of Paris. Nobles sit at polished tables under ceilings painted with cherubs, sipping chocolate and nibbling pastries dusted with sugar. The contrast is sharp enough to make your chest tighten, yet even they have their own worries. Debts, duels, the endless pressure of appearance. Perhaps hunger comes in many forms. You lean against the wall and close your eyes briefly. The faint hum of life seeps in through the cracks of the door. Somewhere a rooster crows again, confused by the light. Somewhere a cart rattles over stones. The sound of hooves fades into the distance, swallowed by the fields. There is something oddly comforting in the predictability of it all. You know where your next piece of bread will come from, and that is enough for now. The village may be poor, but it is alive, bound together by routine and shared struggle. You can almost feel the heartbeat of the community in the steady rhythm of work and rest, hunger and satisfaction. You remember stories of travellers who wrote about rural France, marvelling at the peasants' endurance. They called it simplicity, though it feels more like survival. Historians still argue whether such observers romanticized poverty or misunderstood it entirely. You smile at the thought. Maybe both are true. The light shifts again, filtering through the windows, imperfections, scattering patterns on the wall. You stretch your legs, the wooden floor creaking beneath you. The smell of drying hay drifts in, soft and sweet, reminding you that summer is near. You think about what the rest of the day will bring. The animals must be fed, the tools checked, the water fetched again. There will be more bread later, maybe a stew if luck allows. Life in 18th century France does not offer surprises, only cycles. But there is comfort in knowing what comes next. You stand, brushing crumbs from your lap, and open the door. The light outside feels warmer now, full of movement. Voices carry across the square, and somewhere a baby laughs. The day is calling, as it always does. You take a breath of the cool air and step forward, ready to follow its rhythm once more. You push open the creaking door and step into the soft half-dark of your cottage. The smoke from the hearth lingers like a shawl around the beams, and your eyes take a moment to adjust. The air feels close, thick with the scent of damp earth, ash, and straw. The walls are made of wattle and daub, patched so many times that they seem more memory than structure. You can trace every repair in the uneven plaster, each layer telling a story of cold winters, careless elbows, and patient hands. The floor beneath you is not wood but packed dirt, cool and uneven under your bare feet. Every step releases a faint smell of dust. You look up and see the rafters, blackened by years of smoke. From them hang bundles of herbs, thyme, lavender, a little rosemary dried long ago and forgotten, but still giving off a ghost of fragrance. A cat sleeps on a stool near the fire, its tail flicking lazily at flies. It is here, in this humble space, that the rhythm of 18th century rural life unfolds. According to surviving archives, the average peasant family lived in a single room, shared by parents, children, and sometimes animals. Privacy was a luxury no one could afford. You can hear the faint rustle of someone shifting on the straw mattress, the soft snore of a grandfather curled near the wall. Life happens in whispers here, because walls remember everything. You crouch to stir the ashes in the hearth. A small flame catches, and the light flickers over your hands. The warmth spreads quickly through the small space. In a niche above the fire rests a pot of yesterday's stew, thick and cold. You poke it with a spoon. It shivers, but holds its shape. Dinner and breakfast often blur together. Nothing is wasted, and every scrap has purpose. A lesser-known curiosity from the era is that many families slept in shifts to make the most of the fire's warmth. The first sleep ended around midnight, followed by a period of wakefulness when people prayed, mended clothes, or simply talked quietly before drifting back into a second sleep until dawn. You imagine yourself in that middle hour, half dreaming, listening to the night's small noises, feeling time stretch in ways modern clocks would never allow. The furniture is sparse but clever, a rough table made from planks, a bench with uneven legs, a single chest that holds both clothes and memories. You open the chest and see a few folded garments, a wooden comb, a rosary, and a pewter cup dented from long use. Objects carry weight here, not because they are valuable, but because they are few. Children's voices drift in from outside, shrill with laughter. You smile without realizing it. Childhood in this world is brief, but not joyless. Before long, those same children will join you in the fields, their hands already calloused by practice. It is strange how quickly innocence turns to labor when the seasons dictate your survival. Contemporary accounts reveal that rural cottages were often shared with livestock, especially during winter. The animals' breath added heat, and their presence provided a sense of comfort against the dark. You picture yourself lying in bed, listening to the slow chewing of a cow in the corner, the low bleat of a goat, the rhythmic shifting of hooves on straw. It is a lullaby of necessity. You run your hand along the wall where tools hang neatly. A sickle, a wooden rake, a knife polished to dull brightness. Every item has its place. You take pride in that small order because chaos wastes time. Even a poor house can feel dignified if it is clean and cared for. You dip a rag in water and wipe the table, the cool fabric soothing against your palm. A strange custom still whispered about was the practice of whitewashing walls with lime, not just for cleanliness but for spiritual protection. People believed it kept away bad spirits and sickness alike. You remember your mother mixing lime in a bucket, her arms dusted white as she hummed. Whether it was superstition or simple hygiene, no one questioned it. Outside, the light shifts, spilling gold across the doorway. You can hear the soft buzz of bees through the open window, and the air moves gently across your face. You take a deep breath, feeling the mixture of smoke, herbs, and soil. It is not pleasant by modern standards, but it feels honest, grounding. Every smell is a reminder of labor, of life carried forward by hands rather than machines. Some experts question if the peasantry truly felt trapped by this way of living or if they found contentment in its predictability. Letters and diaries from the period suggest both. You think about that as you tidy the hearth and straighten the bed. There is pride in survival, even when comfort is scarce. Perhaps happiness then was measured less by wealth and more by endurance. A rooster calls again in the distance, its cry echoing faintly through the window. You move toward the door, brushing dust from your skirt. The cottage stands as both refuge and cage, a place that keeps you safe, but also reminds you of your limits. You step outside again, squinting in the brightening light, feeling the ground soft beneath your feet. The village spreads before you like a quiet sea of stone and straw. Smoke rises from chimneys, and the smell of baking bread drifts faintly across the fields. You glance back at your home one more time. It is small, crooked, and imperfect, yet it holds your world within its walls. The sound of a cart creaks from the road, and the distant murmur of voices returns. The day is beginning to stir again, and so must you. You take one last look inside, letting your eyes linger on the glow of the fire and the cat still sleeping soundly. The cottage may be modest, but it is steady, unchanging, a heartbeat within the greater pulse of 18th century France. You close the door gently behind you, the latch clicking softly. The air outside feels cool and alive. The scent of soil and smoke follows you as you walk toward the fields once more, ready to meet the world that waits beyond your threshold. You make your way from the quiet rhythm of the countryside into the restless hum of the city. The road narrows as Paris rises before you, its skyline jagged with steeples, chimneys, and a haze of smoke that never seems to clear. The smell hits first: wood fires, dung, stale beer, and something faintly sweet like baked apples mixed with decay. The sound follows, a chorus of wheels clattering over cobblestones, street sellers shouting, and the distant tolling of church bells. You step into the city's veins, a maze of narrow streets that twist like secrets. The buildings crowd together, their upper floors leaning so close that neighbors could shake hands through windows. You glance up and see laundry fluttering between rooftops, colored cloth against a pale sky. The gutters run down the center of the street, carrying water, refuse, and things better left unnamed. According to surviving police records, many Parisians lived crammed into tall, timbered houses that leaned precariously, with families stacked floor upon floor. The wealthier residents stayed on the lower levels, close to the warmth and away from the stairs. The higher you climbed, the poorer life became. You can feel it as you look up, the scent of perfume and roasting meat on the first floor, the smell of boiled cabbage and damp straw drifting from the garrets above. You climb one of these staircases now, the wood worn smooth and soft beneath your fingers. The light fades with every step until you reach the top, where a single window glows faintly. You push open the door to a garret so small you could touch both walls with outstretched arms. The ceiling slopes so sharply that standing upright feels impossible, yet this tiny space is home. Inside, you see a bed made from straw and old cloth, a cracked basin, and a single chair with one leg shorter than the rest. A candle stub flickers in a bottle, throwing long shadows across the walls. You move closer to the window and look out. From here, the rooftops of Paris stretch endlessly, grey and uneven, dotted with chimneys that puff smoke into the pale morning air. It feels like living at the edge of the sky, where dreams and soot share the same colour. Records from the period show that in some parts of Paris, more than a dozen people might share a single room. Children slept under tables or on straw pallets beside the door. The smell of so many bodies lingers even in your imagination. Yet there is warmth too. People talk, laugh, share what little they have. Life may be cramped, but it is never silent. A small but telling superstition suggested that you should never sweep after sunset, for it might brush away good fortune. You smile at the thought, remembering how many brooms leaned forgotten in corners after dark. Even in the heart of the city, where logic and commerce thrive, old beliefs survive like stubborn weeds between the stones. You make your way down again, careful on the steps. The doorways you pass tell their own stories. One smells of bread and cinnamon, another of fish and vinegar, another of wet wool. The world is layered here, class and scent mingling until they blur. The baker's apprentice dashes past you with a basket of rolls, the steam rising in the cool air. A woman carrying laundry pauses to catch her breath, her arms red from scrubbing. A man in a powdered wig hurries by, one gloved hand holding his hat against the wind. Modern historians interpret this coexistence as both miracle and menace. The city's proximity bred connection but also disease, empathy but also resentment. When people live this close, boundaries blur and tempers rise quickly. You can almost feel the tension in the air, humming beneath the noise. You wander through a narrow passage where sunlight barely reaches the ground. The walls are damp, green with moss near the base. A cat slinks past your feet, vanishing through a hole in the stone. You follow the curve of the street until it opens suddenly into a small courtyard. A fountain trickles at its center, surrounded by children chasing one another with shrill laughter. For a moment, the city feels gentle, like a heartbeat slowing after a long run. You sit on the edge of the fountain, running your fingers through the cool water. The sound of the trickle covers the street noise, and you close your eyes. You imagine what it must be like to live here year after year, always surrounded by motion yet rarely by silence. Perhaps that is what draws people to cities, the illusion that life can be shared, even in suffering. A vendor's cry snaps you back. "Hot chestnuts!" he shouts, waving a basket lined with paper. The scent of roasted nuts drifts through the air, warm and smoky. You buy a few, feeling the heat through the paper as you crack one open. It tastes like winter comfort, sweet and faintly bitter. Around you, others do the same. A servant girl in a torn shawl, an old man humming to himself, a young couple whispering by the wall. Hunger brings everyone together. You make your way toward the main street again, where the sound grows louder. Horses whinny, bells jingle, and shop signs swing in the wind. You catch glimpses of painted words: boulanger, apothecary, librairie, each doorway promising a small miracle for the right price. The mix of smells is dizzying: spices, ink, leather, and sewage. It is both disgusting and intoxicating, a scent that says Paris more clearly than any perfume. Some observers of the time wrote that the city seemed alive, breathing through its people. You begin to see what they meant. Every alley has a pulse, every face a story. Even the walls seem to listen. You imagine them whispering at night, repeating the days, gossip to the darkness. As evening nears, the light softens. Lamps begin to glow in the lower windows, tiny golden squares against the deepening blue. You watch a group of boys chase one another down the street, their laughter bouncing off the walls. A woman hums as she shakes dust from a rug. The smell of dinner drifts through the open doors, onions frying, bread toasting, wine spilling. The city changes tone with the light, becoming almost tender. You climb back up toward your garret, your feet tracing the same worn steps. The candle is still flickering when you enter, its wax nearly gone. You sit on the edge of the bed and look out once more at the rooftops. The air feels cooler now, carrying the faint echo of distant music. Somewhere below, someone is laughing, someone is arguing, someone is singing. You let your eyes close slowly, imagining the city breathing around you, restless and alive. Inside this small room, you are part of its great, imperfect rhythm. The world outside may glitter and stink and roar, but here, in this flickering half-light, you find a strange peace. Morning light spills through the cracked window of your small Paris room, and you wake to the sound of footsteps above and laughter below. The city has no patience for rest. Even before you rise, you can hear the rattle of wheels and the clink of buckets. You stretch, rub your eyes, and glance at the pile of clothes folded neatly at your bedside. They smell faintly of starch and smoke, the scent of every Parisian morning. You hold up your shirt or gown to the light. The seams are hand-stitched, uneven but sturdy. Fashion is more than fabric in 18th century France. It is language, status, and survival. Your clothes announce who you are before you speak. A frayed hem can betray poverty as quickly as an accent. A polished buckle can open doors that wit alone cannot. Most researchers agree that the 18th century was the golden age of French fashion. The court at Versailles dictated taste for all of Europe, from powdered wigs to embroidered waistcoats. But you, standing here with a patched coat or simple dress, are far removed from that glittering world. You can imagine it, though. Silks rustling in candlelight, ribbons glimmering like spilled jewels, the faint rustle of fans hiding whispers more dangerous than secrets. You wash your face in cold water, splashing away the night. There is no soap, only a rough cloth, and a little rose water if you are lucky. The chill wakes your senses sharply. You look into a small mirror, its surface cloudy with age, and see a reflection shaped by labor, not luxury. Your hands bear the marks of work, and your hair is stubborn, escaping whatever comb you offer it. An amusing corner of daily life reveals that wigs were not reserved for nobles alone. Even tradesmen wore smaller, powdered versions on special occasions to imitate the style of the elite. The smell, however, was something few modern noses could endure. Powder was often scented with lavender or orange peel to mask the odor of sweat and animal fat used to hold curls in place. You smile at the absurdity of it, imagining streets filled with clouds of perfumed dust every time someone adjusted their hair. You step outside, blending into the stream of humanity that fills every Parisian street. The city moves like a single living organism. You pass women balancing baskets of ribbons, men shouting about fabric dyes, and tailors bent over shop counters where needles gleam like silver fish. Every alley seems to hum with the rhythm of cloth being cut, stitched, and traded. You pause to look through the window of a seamstress shop. Inside, a woman in spectacles is fitting a gown to a mannequin, her fingers quick and precise. The fabric glows in the light, silk the color of honey, shimmering with every movement. A younger apprentice sits near the window, embroidering tiny flowers onto a piece of linen. Her lips move silently, perhaps whispering a prayer for steady hands. According to fashion journals of the period, the elite changed their clothing multiple times a day. Morning dresses were light and informal, while evening gowns exploded with decoration. A man of means might wear lace at his cuffs, a jeweled brooch at his neck, and shoes with heels painted red, a signal of noble blood. For the poor, imitation was an art form. A ribbon dyed with onion skin could mimic silk's golden hue, and a discarded scrap of lace could be transformed into a treasured accessory. You run your hand over your sleeve, feeling the rough weave of homespun wool. It itches slightly, but you are used to it. You catch sight of a noble carriage rolling past, the wheels splashing mud onto the stones. Inside, a woman leans lazily against the velvet seat, her powdered face pale as porcelain, her hair piled high like a sculpture. You watch her glide past, untouchable and oblivious. Opinions remain divided about whether such extravagance inspired admiration or resentment among the common people. Some saw it as beauty worth aspiring to, a glimpse of another world. Others saw it as insult, proof that France's hierarchy was built on silken threads ready to snap. You watch the carriage disappear, its golden wheels catching the sun, and wonder which feeling lives in your own chest. You duck into a narrow passage where laundry hangs from the upper floors, dripping onto your shoulders. The air smells faintly of lye and wet cloth. A washerwoman nearby beats linen against a stone slab, her movements rhythmic and fierce. Her sleeves are rolled up to her elbows, muscles taut. The foam splashes her skirt, but she doesn't pause. She hums a tune that rises above the noise, steady and sure. Chroniclers of the time noted that washerwomen were the backbone of urban labor, earning meager wages but commanding respect for their endurance. They stood knee-deep in cold water for hours, their hands raw, their backs bent, yet they carried themselves with pride. It was said that a laundress could recognize her client's wealth by touch alone, feeling the difference between silk, linen, and homespun without opening her eyes. You pass a small perfumery, its door open to the street. Inside, rows of bottles gleam in the sunlight, each filled with golden liquid. The air is thick with scent, amber, rose, violet. Perfume is not a luxury here. It is armor. The city smells too strongly of humanity, and people hide their bodies behind clouds of fragrance. You inhale and feel dizzy, intoxicated by sweetness and musk. A street performer appears near the corner, a young man with ribbons in his hair and bells on his boots. He twirls in the street, laughing, his coat patched but clean. Children gather around him, clapping to his rhythm. You smile despite yourself. For a moment, even in the chaos of smells and motion, there is joy. You continue walking, your feet tracing the edge of the marketplace. Stalls overflow with bolts of fabric in every color, deep indigo, saffron, faded rose. You run your fingers along the cloth, marveling at the softness. The merchant grins, naming prices that make you laugh quietly. It is a world built on texture and illusion, where anyone can appear richer or poorer, depending on how they drape their shoulders. As the sun climbs higher, the streets grow hotter. The powder on people's faces begins to melt, streaking pale cheeks with traces of sweat. A wig slips crookedly, and its wearer pretends not to notice. You feel the air thicken with dust and perfume, as if the whole city is wearing too much makeup. You turn back toward your garret, passing mirrors displayed in a shop window. For a heartbeat, your reflection stands beside those of strangers, a baker, a lady, a child. You all look equally tired, equally alive. The difference between classes blurs in the shimmer of glass. You climb the stairs slowly, the wood groaning beneath your weight. When you reach your room, you set your hat aside and let the breeze touch your face. The sun spills through the window, painting your hands in light. You think of how strange it is that clothing, something so simple, can hold such power. It hides and reveals, divides and connects. You lie back, the day's sounds still echoing faintly from below. Somewhere, laughter drifts up from the street. Somewhere, a sewing needle taps gently against wood. The city breathes again, restless and alive, and you drift with it, wrapped not in silk or lace, but in the soft exhaustion of being human. The city begins to stir before the sun fully claims the streets. You can hear vendors setting up, their voices echoing in uneven rhythm as they pull carts into position. The cobblestones are slick with morning mist, and the air carries that unmistakable Paris blend of bread, smoke, and horse dung. You tighten your shawl and step into the street, drawn toward the heart of the movement. The market comes alive gradually, like a stage filling with actors. Crates of vegetables clatter down, chickens protest from wicker baskets, and merchants shout over one another in good humor. You pass a woman arranging apples in neat pyramids, her fingers stained with sap. She catches you watching and grins, teeth flashing bright against her weathered face. Contemporary reports make clear that markets in 18th century France were more than trading posts. They were the pulse of the people. Prices, gossip, politics, and flirtations all collided here. A loaf of bread could reveal the state of the nation, and a single rumor could ripple through the entire city by noon. You can feel it now in the hum of the crowd, the electric mixture of need and noise. You step closer to a stall where a butcher sharpens his knife with quick, confident strokes. The sound is harsh, yet oddly soothing, like the repetition of a familiar tune. Meat hangs behind him in thick slabs, glistening under the morning light. You avert your eyes, not from disgust, but because you cannot afford what he sells. Most people cannot. The smell of blood and salt drifts through the air, mingling with the yeasty sweetness of nearby bakeries. One charming oddity of the time was that people often judged the honesty of a vendor by the sound of their voice. A steady tone suggested fairness, while a high, nervous pitch meant deceit. You find yourself listening carefully now, amused by how easily trust could hang on a note. The fishmonger's call rises above the others, rich and sure. Perhaps he is an honest man, or perhaps just a skilled performer. You move toward the bread stalls, drawn by the scent of crust baking somewhere nearby. The loaves on display vary in size, shape, and color. A few are golden, fine, and airy. Others are dark and dense. You reach out to touch one, feeling its warmth. For most Parisians, bread is not simply food, but measure and metaphor. To have bread is to survive. To lack it is to suffer. Letters from the period describe how entire families planned their days around bread purchases. The wife might stand in line before dawn, clutching her last few sous, while her husband worked to earn enough for tomorrow's loaf. Sometimes the baker's shelves were empty, and the waiting turned to anger. You can sense that tension even in this bright morning. The smiles of the sellers are fragile, the laughter just a layer over fatigue. You wander further into the maze of stalls. A woman in a wide hat sells herbs tied in bunches, their scents sharp and green. Thyme for courage, sage for wisdom, lavender for calm. She explains their uses as if she were both doctor and priestess. You buy a small bundle of mint and tuck it into your sleeve, its cool aroma rising each time you move your arm. The sound of a barrel organ drifts from a nearby corner. A young man cranks it steadily, while a small monkey in a waistcoat dances beside him. Children gather, clapping in time. For a few minutes, the air feels lighter, the hardship softened by melody. The man nods politely as you drop a coin into his cup. Historians who study urban life note that markets were the closest thing to democracy most commoners experienced. Here, a noble could bargain beside a servant, a priest could joke with a beggar. The boundaries blurred for a few precious hours before snapping back into place. You glance around and see it for yourself. Lace cuffs brushing rough sleeves, polished shoes stepping beside bare feet. It is chaotic, noisy, and strangely beautiful. A superstition whispered from stall to stall warns that whistling while shopping will chase good luck away. You catch yourself humming and stop mid-note, grinning. Maybe it is nonsense, but in a world so uncertain, small rituals feel like protection. You notice others avoiding ladders, touching the bread before buying, or crossing themselves discreetly when counting change. Superstition becomes logic when logic cannot promise a full stomach. Near the square's edge, the smell of roasted chestnuts curls upward, mingling with the chatter. You buy a handful, their shells warm against your palms. Around you, vendors argue over territory while customers press closer. A baby cries, a dog barks, and above it all the church bell tolls the hour. The market continues without pause. Academic opinion remains split regarding whether these gatherings brought people together or reminded them of their divisions. Some see the markets as symbols of community, places where laughter and necessity met on equal ground. Others argue they were mirrors of inequality, where the poor came to watch the rich consume. You sense both truths coexisting, one folded neatly inside the other like a loaf's soft crumb beneath its hard crust. You stop at a cart selling trinkets, pins, combs, ribbons. The merchant, a man with kind eyes and a missing tooth, insists that each piece brings luck. You buy a small wooden button carved with a heart. It costs less than a meal, but feels like a luxury, a tiny rebellion against scarcity. You tuck it into your pocket, smiling at the thought that something so small could outlast hunger. As the morning deepens, the sun climbs higher, turning the air thick with heat and scent. You wipe sweat from your neck, breathing in the dense perfume of humanity. The city feels alive in every sense, raw, noisy, pungent, vibrant. You glance at the faces around you, strangers bound by need, by rhythm, by the simple act of being here together. Slowly, the clamour begins to ease. Sellers pack their goods, calling last offers. Children gather scraps from the ground. The monkey bows one final time as the organ falls silent. You watch the market fade back into ordinary streets, knowing it will return tomorrow, just as loud, just as vital. You walk away, clutching your mint and wooden button. Behind you, a few voices linger, the sound of life refusing to end. The cobblestones are warm now beneath your feet, the air still humming faintly with laughter and argument. You turn toward home, the scent of bread following like a memory. The sound of the marketplace fades behind you as you turn toward the quieter lanes that lead to the workshops. The rhythm of the city shifts. The cries of merchants give way to the steady clang of metal, the scrape of saws, and the faint tapping of hammers. You pass through a narrow archway and find yourself in a street alive with work. Smoke rises from forged chimneys, and sawdust drifts in the sunlight like golden dust. You pause to watch a blacksmith. His sleeves are rolled to the elbow, his arms streaked with soot. Each strike of his hammer sends sparks dancing, the sound echoing like a heartbeat through the street. His apprentice, a boy of perhaps 12, works the bellows with both hands, his face shining with sweat. According to surviving guild records, apprenticeships often began before adolescence, binding children to their masters for years of labour and instruction. It was a world where skill meant survival, and a single mistake could cost both pride and livelihood. You continue walking, passing open doors that reveal different trades in motion. In one, a cobbler bends over a boot, his needle flashing in rhythm. In another, a printer leans over a wooden press, the smell of ink thick in the air. The sound of paper tearing and rollers squeaking fills the room. You run your fingers along the edge of a newly printed sheet and feel the faint texture of wet letters, still tacky with black. A peculiar domestic habit shows that workers often carried small amulets in their aprons to bring good fortune or protect their tools. Some wore tiny wooden crosses, others a smooth pebble from the river. You spot one hanging from the forge's wall, a simple charm carved into the shape of a hand. It looks humble, yet it carries years of silent faith in its grain. In the next workshop, the air smells of soap and damp linen. Women sit in rows, washing, scrubbing, and pressing clothes. Their laughter breaks through the monotony of work. The sound feels bright against the dark beams of the ceiling. The oldest among them sings a ballad about a sailor who never returns, and the younger ones hum along softly, their hands never stopping. Eyewitnesses often recorded that the guilds of France held remarkable control over who could practice a trade. To become a master, you needed skill, patience, and money to pay the fees. Without those, you remained an assistant forever. Yet within that hierarchy, pride ran deep. Craftsmen saw themselves as guardians of tradition, their calloused hands carrying knowledge passed down through generations. You approach a carpenter's shop where shavings curl across the floor like ribbons. The scent of wood fills the air, warm and sweet. A man stands bent over a table, his knife gliding through oak with practiced grace. You can almost hear the whisper of years in each careful motion. He glances up and nods to you before returning to his task. An unexpected folk custom held that craftsmen should never whistle indoors. It was said to summon misfortune or make tools go dull. You catch yourself humming again and stop, smiling at the superstition's persistence. Even in a world governed by muscle and material, the unseen still mattered. You pause near a window where light spills across a weaver's loom. The threads shimmer, colours crossing in precise patterns. Her fingers move swiftly, almost like a dance. The rhythm hypnotic. Threads become fabric, and fabric becomes livelihood. You wonder how many stories are woven into each piece, how many hopes tangled in the warp and weft. According to accounts left by travellers, Parisian workshops were both noisy and intimate. Workers shared songs, jokes, and meals, creating small families within their walls. For many, the shop was a second home, sometimes a kinder one than the place they slept. You imagine sitting among them, breaking bread at noon, sharing wine from a communal jug, the taste earthy and rough. Experts remain divided on whether these guilds encouraged creativity or stifled it. Some argue that strict regulations prevented innovation, locking artisans into old patterns. Others claim the discipline preserved skill and quality in a changing world. The truth, as you sense now, may rest somewhere between. A clockmaker nearby adjusts a delicate mechanism, the gears clicking softly as he turns a key. His workbench gleams with brass fragments, magnifying lenses, and half-finished projects. You lean closer, captivated by the precision. Time itself seems to pause as he tests the ticking. He smiles faintly, satisfied, then closes the back of the watch with a snap. At the end of the street, a tavern door stands open. The smell of ale and sweat drifts out. You hear the hum of men's voices, the scrape of chairs, the deep murmur of debate. Work ends here each evening, but talk never does. Inside, the workers gather to share complaints, laughter, and small dreams. You stand for a moment, listening to the rhythm of their conversation, its cadence both tired and hopeful. A forgotten rural saying advised that a man's worth could be measured by the sound of his hammer. You think about that as you turn back toward the forge, the rhythm still ringing in your ears. Every strike seems to echo beyond the walls, shaping not just metal, but the unseen framework of a nation. The sun begins to lower, casting long shadows across the narrow lane. The workshops slowly quiet, as tools are cleaned and shutters drawn. The blacksmith quenches his fire with a hiss. The carpenter sweeps his floor, and the washerwomen hang their final cloths to dry. You linger, reluctant to leave the sound of purpose behind. As you walk away, the smell of iron and wood clings to your clothes. The city's evening breeze feels cooler now, brushing your face with the faint scent of river water. You realize that every clang, every scrape, every stitch you witness today is part of a larger symphony, the heartbeat of a society built on craft. You are walking through history itself, and it breathes in rhythm with you. The streets grow quieter as you leave the rhythm of the workshops behind. The clang of hammers fades into the murmur of distant bells, and the smell of iron is replaced by the softer scent of hay and ink. Ahead lies a small schoolhouse, its walls streaked with chalk dust and sunlight. You stop at the open door and look inside. Children sit on rough benches, their backs straight, eyes bright with curiosity and fatigue. The teacher, a thin man in a worn black coat, walks slowly between them, tapping a stick against his palm. His voice drones steadily as he reads from a small book, the words in Latin. You do not understand every phrase, but you can feel the weight of his tone, patient, proud, and slightly weary. Chroniclers at the time agreed that education in 18th century France was uneven and fragile. In the cities, some boys learned to read and write, while in the countryside, literacy often depended on the goodwill of the local priest. For many families, school was a luxury that took children away from work. The harvest, after all, waited for no lesson. You step further inside, careful not to make a sound. The floor creaks, and a few heads turn. One boy grins shyly before looking back to his slate. The air smells of wax, ink, and old wood. A small crucifix hangs above the board, its shadow long and steady. The teacher turns a page, his hands trembling slightly. Among the students, you notice a girl sitting quietly in the corner, her hands folded on her lap. She listens intently but does not have a book. In many schools, girls were not officially admitted, yet some teachers allowed them to sit silently, learning by ear. You imagine her repeating the words later in secret, tracing letters on a scrap of cloth with her finger. Letters from the period describe how parents argued about the value of schooling, Some saw it as a path to opportunity. Others feared it filled children's heads with useless ideas. The poor could not afford idle minds. Yet even the simplest education could change the way one looked at the world. To read was to unlock power. A superstition both tender and absurd told parents that a child who learned too fast might attract envy or illness. So they often pretended ignorance, answering questions slowly so as not to tempt fate. You watch the children struggling with their letters and wonder how many are truly confused and how many are simply cautious. At the back of the room stands a shelf of worn books. You run your fingers along the spines, tracing faded titles, catechisms, fables, arithmetic. Paper is precious here, and every page carries the smell of ink and effort. The teacher glances toward you, nods politely, then returns to his students. Outside, the sunlight sharpens, a bell rings, and lessons end. The children tumble out of the doorway, shouting, laughing, and scattering into the street. The sudden noise feels alive, the kind that makes you smile without meaning to. You watch them race toward the fields, their wooden clogs clattering against the stones. The girl with no book lingers a moment longer, then hurries after them, her braid swinging behind her. Diaries left by ordinary people remind us that learning did not end in the classroom. Many children apprenticed early, carrying what little they knew into trades. The blacksmith's boy might read the weight of metals like words. The baker's daughter might memorize recipes like poetry. Knowledge moved through hands as much as through ink. You follow the children into the village, where small workshops hum again with work. In one, a young apprentice turns a wheel, grinding a blade until it gleams. His master stands behind him, arms folded, eyes narrowed. You can see the balance between patience and pressure. Every mistake here is a lesson, but a painful one. An amusing practice persisted even among the educated. Teachers sometimes made students wear a wooden donkey's head if they failed a lesson. It was meant to shame them into effort, though it often earned laughter instead. You imagine the mix of pride and humiliation that must have filled the room on those days. Perhaps that too was a lesson, the cruel kind that lingers longer than grammar. Travellers passing through wrote with surprise that French children were taught manners almost before letters. Bowing, curtsying, and speaking softly were marks of civility, as important as knowing the alphabet. A well-behaved child could bring honour to a poor family, while rudeness could stain even a noble name. The etiquette of the age was another kind of language, one that spoke before words ever did. You walk past the village green, where a group of boys are kicking a ball made from stitched rags. Their laughter fills the air, bright and unrestrained. The teacher stands at a distance, arms crossed, trying not to smile. You see the faintest glint of pride in his tired eyes. Perhaps he knows that the lessons learned outside the classroom often matter most. Specialists have long disagreed about how effective 18th century education truly was. Some argue it laid the foundation for Enlightenment ideals and social change. Others insist it was little more than discipline disguised as learning. Watching the children play, you suspect both might be true. Knowledge, like freedom, begins quietly, almost shyly, before it finds its voice. You walk on, the sound of laughter fading behind you. The road opens toward the fields, where some of the older children are already working. They move with practiced ease, tying sheaves and carrying baskets. Their lessons are not written in ink, but in calloused palms and aching backs. You pause for a moment, feeling the breeze on your face. The scent of wheat and sunlight mixes with the faint echo of the teacher's voice still lingering in your ears. You think of the girl without a book, her mind sharp and silent, her dreams larger than her village. Maybe one day she will write her own name on a page and smile at how far she has come. The bell tolls again, softer now in the distance. The day moves forward, and you follow, carrying the memory of chalk dust and children's laughter with you. The world, you realize, changes not in revolutions of fire, but in whispers of learning passed from one pair of hands to another. The morning haze begins to lift, revealing the church spire at the heart of the town. The bell rings in slow, deliberate strokes, each note drifting across rooftops and fields. You feel it in your chest rather than your ears, a vibration that seems to reach straight into the soil. People emerge from doorways, crossing themselves automatically, as if pulled by invisible strings. It is Sunday, and in 18th century France, that means the rhythm of work gives way to the rhythm of faith. You walk toward the church with the others, the sound of footsteps blending with the tolling bell. The air smells of wax and bread, and somewhere nearby, someone is burning incense too early, its sweetness cutting through the morning chill. As you enter the square, you see the priest waiting near the doors, his robe sweeping the ground like a shadow. The people nod to him respectfully but keep their distance. Faith is both comfort and caution here. Archival documents confirm that the parish was the true centre of life in rural France. The priest recorded births, marriages, and deaths, kept accounts of tithes, and sometimes settled disputes when tempers rose. For many, he was the closest thing to authority they would ever meet face to face. Religion was not just belief, but structure, a way of measuring time and belonging. You step inside the church, where cool air replaces the dust of the street. The scent of stone and candle wax wraps around you. Light seeps through stained glass, painting the walls in colours that seem too beautiful for the poverty outside. A choir of children sings softly, their voices thin but pure, and the sound drifts up to the rafters like smoke. One of the more curious traditions claimed that if a candle guttered during Mass, it meant someone in the congregation was thinking sinful thoughts. You glance around, half amused, and notice the flicker of flames in the corner. A few heads turn too, eyes narrowing in suspicion. It is strange how even small flames can carry judgment. The priest steps forward, his voice low and deliberate. His sermon speaks of duty, patience, and humility. He reminds the congregation that the hardships of this world are tests, and that the kingdom of heaven waits for those who endure. You listen, your mind wandering. His words are steady, but they fall on ears shaped by hunger and toil. You wonder how many in the pews truly believe that suffering is sacred. Outside, a beggar leans against the wall, his bowl resting beside him. He does not enter. The church is for salvation, but the porch belongs to charity. A few coins clink softly into his bowl as parishioners pass, their gestures small but sincere. Even the poorest find something to give. Letters exchanged between rural families suggest that religion offered both hope and discipline. It taught resignation as much as comfort. The calendar of saints dictated when people could eat, marry, or celebrate. To disobey the rhythm of feast and fast was to risk isolation. Even love was scheduled by the liturgical year. After the service, the square fills again with voices. People stand in small groups, trading news and blessings. Children chase one another around the fountain, their laughter echoing against the church walls. The priest walks among them, smiling faintly, his hands clasped behind his back. You notice the way people lower their eyes when he passes. Reverence and fear often walk hand in hand. A peculiar household rule suggested that holy water should never be thrown out after blessing. Instead, it was sprinkled over thresholds to guard against misfortune. You watch a woman dip her fingers into the basin and touch her child's forehead, lips moving silently. In that small act lies centuries of quiet trust. A man nearby argues softly with another about the priest's sermon. One insists that faith demands obedience. The other murmurs that even God must want justice. Their disagreement ends with a shrug, but the words linger. The revolution may still be years away, yet you can feel its breath somewhere in the air. Debate continues among scholars regarding the sincerity of 18th century belief. Some describe it as deeply rooted, while others see it as habit disguised as faith. Standing here, surrounded by bowed heads and murmured prayers, you suspect it was both. Religion was the language of survival, spoken fluently by those who had no other means to explain their suffering. The bells ring again, signaling the end of Mass. People drift toward home, baskets swinging from their arms. The sound of conversation rises and fades like waves on stone. You stay behind a moment longer, watching the priest extinguish candles one by one. Each small puff of smoke curls upward, vanishing into the dim air. Outside, sunlight has grown warm. The beggar collects his coins and shuffles away. Children's laughter returns to the streets. The rhythm of daily life picks up again, faith folded neatly back into habit. You walk toward the river, feeling the world settle into its familiar hum. You pass a small roadside shrine decorated with wilted flowers and a wooden carving of the Virgin. Someone has left a crust of bread at its base, perhaps as an offering. The gesture feels humble, yet defiant, a quiet conversation with the divine. You pause, touch the edge of the carving, and whisper a hope you do not quite name. As you move on, the sound of the bells fades behind you. The fields ahead shimmer under the midday sun. Religion has done its work for the day, binding hearts together with invisible threads. You breathe deeply, tasting dust and incense, and think about how belief lingers in places long after words are forgotten. The bells have gone quiet now, replaced by the low murmur of midday voices and the scent of cooking that drifts through the warm air. You follow your nose toward the edge of the square, where smoke curls up from chimneys and the rhythm of daily labor pauses for food. The French day, like the French soul, runs on meals. Whether noble or peasant, city dweller or farmer, everyone feels the pull of the hour when the stomach calls louder than duty. You sit for a moment beneath the shadow of a chestnut tree, watching families gather. Some sit on overturned barrels, others on the ground itself. The clink of cutlery mingles with laughter, and the scent of stewing onions makes your mouth water. Nearby, a woman dips a ladle into a pot, suspended over the fire, and the aroma of broth rises like music. Parish registers hint that meals in 18th century France revealed the social order more clearly than any law. A noble's midday feast glittered with wine and porcelain. A peasant's lunch relied on what could be grown, borrowed, or stretched. Yet across all ranks, the act of eating together was sacred. It was both nourishment and ritual, a daily promise that life still held rhythm and meaning. You are invited to sit beside a small family. Their meal is simple but lovingly prepared. Bread torn into rough pieces, a stew of lentils and carrots, and a pitcher of watered wine. The mother sprinkles salt from a pouch, the father mutters a short grace, and the children fall silent just long enough to taste the first bites. You follow their example. The stew tastes earthy, humble, and honest, flavored with time and patience. One rather whimsical practice involved placing a crust of bread upside down on the table to honor the local baker. Superstition or gratitude, no one is certain, but the gesture endures. You notice the father turning his loaf carefully before breaking it, his eyes soft with habit. He smiles at you and says, "It keeps the bread from turning against us." In the distance, the nobility dine differently. Chroniclers of the period wrote with awe of multi-course meals served under chandeliers, where servants glided silently with trays of roasted game, cheeses, and delicate pastries. Wine flowed without measure, and conversation sparkled as much as the silver. There, a meal was performance, a reflection of grace and wealth. Here, it is survival, seasoned with gratitude. You imagine the contrast as you chew your bread. A noble's fork may gleam, but yours feels truer in your hand. You think of the distance between the dining halls of Versailles and the village square where you now sit. One glitters with crystal, the other breathes with steam and laughter. Yet both are stages where human hunger performs its eternal play. Travelers' diaries describe how the French spoke of food as if it were art. Even among the poor, recipes were guarded secrets, flavors adjusted by instinct more than measure. To cook was to create, to stir life into the simplest ingredients. You watch the mother add a final pinch of herbs to her pot and stir slowly, her face glowing in the heat. It feels like a kind of devotion. Folklore from the provinces whispered that sharing salt with a stranger made you friends for life. You mention this quietly, and the family laughs, passing you their salt pouch in jest. The gesture warms you more than the stew. You think of how, in every age, hospitality has been the purest language, older than speech itself. As the meal continues, conversation drifts from harvests to taxes, from children's mischief to rumors about Paris. The father mentions that bread prices have risen again. His voice stays calm, but there is a tightness behind his smile. The mother listens, nodding, her spoon pausing mid-air. You sense the invisible weight pressing over them, the quiet fear that hunger could return with the next bad harvest. Economic records quietly indicate that the cost of grain consumed over half the income of many families by the 1780s. A single poor season could turn villages desperate. You can feel that truth sitting here, hidden beneath the laughter, waiting in the silence between spoons. You look up and see a bird land nearby, hopping close to the crumbs that fall. The children giggle and toss it bits of bread. It pecks greedily, unafraid. For a moment, everyone watches, smiling. The scene feels timeless, untouched by class or history. The simple act of feeding another creature mirrors the grace that sustains them. Some experts question whether peasants truly resented the rich or merely envied their ease. Others argue that quiet bitterness was always simmering beneath civility. You glance at the father again, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Perhaps both feelings lived side by side, like hunger and gratitude, inseparable and enduring. When the meal ends, the family gathers their things. The children lick the last traces of broth from their bowls, and the mother pours the leftover wine into a small flask for later. Before leaving, she tucks a piece of bread into your hand with a nod. You thank her, moved by the gesture. Nearby, A group of workers share their own meal more noisily. They tear at loaves, clinking mugs of cider, joking loudly about their masters. The sound is rough but joyous. Even laughter, you realize, can be an act of rebellion when life is hard. The bells from the church tower strike again, marking the hour. The square empties slowly as people return to their tasks. The fires die down, and the smell of smoke lingers like memory. You stand, brushing crumbs from your clothes, and take a last bite of the bread the mother gave you. It tastes of warmth, salt, and the kindness of strangers. As you walk away, the world feels softer. The noise of labor begins again in the distance. But for a moment, you carry the quiet peace of the meal with you. Food, you think, is more than sustenance. It is the shared heartbeat of existence. The simplest lunch can bind lives together, if only for a few fleeting moments beneath the afternoon sun. The afternoon drifts onward, golden and drowsy, as you wander toward the market square once more. The morning bustle has softened into a slower hum. Stalls that were once crowded now stand in half shade, their owners chatting idly or packing away what remains. The scent of roasted nuts and herbs lingers like perfume in the air. You move through it quietly, feeling the pulse of Paris settle into its steady afternoon rhythm. The square itself is a theatre of colour and motion. A woman selling ribbons fans herself lazily, while a boy chases pigeons between the stalls. The cobblestones gleam where someone has spilled water, and the air hums faintly with flies and laughter. In one corner, a pair of old men argue over the weight of a sack of flour. Their gestures are animated, but their voices are soft with familiarity. Contemporary observers noted that markets in 18th century France were as much about community as commerce. They were where people came not only to trade, but to talk, to argue, to listen, and to belong. The baker's stall was a post office, a gossip circle, and sometimes a courtroom all at once. The city's heartbeat passed through these narrow lanes of barter and banter. You pause at a fruit stand where pears gleam in the light, their skins golden and speckled. The merchant offers one with a grin, slicing it open to reveal pale flesh glistening with juice. You take a bite. It is sweet and gritty, tasting faintly of dust and sunlight. He laughs at your delight, proud of his harvest. One of the more curious traditions claimed that touching the first fruit of the day with both hands would bring prosperity. You see a few women doing it almost absent-mindedly, fingers brushing the apples as they choose. Old habits linger, even when the reasons fade. A boy nearby shouts prices for onions, his voice cracking mid-sentence. He cannot be more than 10, yet his confidence fills the space. His mother watches proudly from the next stall, folding paper bags with quick, efficient movements. You wonder how long before he will replace her entirely, his voice grown steady and strong. Letters from the period describe markets as places where all classes crossed paths. A noblewoman might lower her veil to inspect lace made by a poor widow. A scholar might buy ink beside a washerwoman buying soap. The exchanges were brief, but they made the city breathe. Each coin passed from hand to hand carried not only value but the warmth of shared humanity. Street gossip from the period insisted that certain vendors had luck charms hidden under their stalls. You crouch slightly and catch sight of a small carved figure tucked among the cabbages. The merchant sees you looking and winks. He keeps the rats away, she says with mock seriousness. You smile, knowing such charms protect more than produce. They guard hope itself. A beggar moves quietly through the crowd, his hat outstretched. Some people give coins. Others offer a crust of bread or a kind word. No one ignores him completely. There is an unspoken understanding that fortune shifts easily. Today's giver might be tomorrow's beggar. Paintings and sketches from the time illustrate the beauty hidden in such scenes. The glow of copper pots, the tilt of straw hats, the play of light on fish scales. You notice it now as if seeing through an artist's eyes the market as a living canvas, ordinary yet filled with grace. You stop by a cheese seller's table. Wheels of pale cream and golden rind are stacked like treasure. The smell is sharp and earthy, almost alive. She offers you a small piece, and it crumbles under your tongue, rich with salt. She tells you it came from her cousin's farm 2 days' ride away. In that single bite, you taste fields, cows, rain, and time itself. Academic circles continue to dispute whether Parisian markets were engines of equality or instruments of control. Some scholars argue that they allowed the poor to sustain themselves outside royal reach, while others believe they kept people pacified with routine. You consider both as you watch the vendors laughing together, their hands busy, their eyes alert. Perhaps the truth lies in the noise itself, order and rebellion mingled, indistinguishable. A man selling roasted chestnuts passes you a paper cone filled with steaming nuts. The heat seeps through the paper and into your palms. You walk slowly, peeling one open, watching the smoke curl upward like memory. Around you, children laugh, lovers whisper, and someone begins to sing a folk tune. The melody drifts through the square, half forgotten but familiar enough that a few voices join in. A rumour floats by in conversation. A noble family is visiting from Versailles, bringing silks and perfume to sell. The thought sends a small ripple of curiosity through the crowd. Even gossip, you realize, is a form of currency here, traded as eagerly as bread. As the sun lowers, shadows stretch across the square. Vendors begin to pack their goods into crates and baskets. The smell of crushed herbs and spilled wine mixes with the metallic tang of dusk. A woman sweeps the cobblestones, her broom scattering petals and straw. The day folds in on itself, slow and tender. You find a quiet corner and watch the last of the crowd disperse. The square, so loud just hours ago, now holds only echoes. A few pigeons pick at crumbs, and the air cools against your skin. Somewhere nearby, a bell rings softly, calling the city toward evening. You take one last look at the stalls, the faded awnings, the lingering smoke. Each mark and stain on the stones tells a story of hands, of hunger, of survival, wrapped in routine. The market will return tomorrow, alive again, repeating its music. You walk away, knowing that this place, chaotic and fragrant, is the beating heart of daily life, the quiet miracle that keeps France fed and dreaming. You wake the next morning to the faint smell of smoke and something sharp and unfamiliar. Outside, the cobblestones are wet from an early drizzle, and a grey mist hovers above the rooftops. The city feels slower today, the air thick with rain and memory. As you walk through the streets, you notice people gathered around a wagon piled with herbs, jars, and folded cloths. A voice calls out, deep and theatrical, promising cures for everything from headaches to heartbreak. You have stumbled upon the doctor's cart, the travelling theatre of medicine in 18th century France. Municipal records quietly show that physicians were few and mostly confined to large cities. For ordinary people, healing came from a tangle of faith, folklore, and improvisation. The lines between doctor, barber, and magician blurred easily. One might bleed you to balance your humours, another might wrap you in herbs, while a third offered prayers and a cup of hot wine. You move closer to the wagon. Bottles glimmer like jewels, their contents thick and cloudy. The man behind them wears a wide hat and an expression of deep importance. He gestures dramatically, holding up a vial of golden liquid. Restorative elixir, he proclaims, for strength, beauty, and eternal youth. A few coins jingle, hands reach forward, and he smiles as if he has just cured the world. One odd household superstition warned that rubbing garlic on your feet could draw sickness down and out of the body. It sounds absurd, but the logic feels almost poetic, letting the body release its darkness through its roots. You pass a group of women discussing remedies of their own: vinegar compresses, leeches, a secret tea made from nettles and honey. Their voices are confident, their tone certain. Here, everyone is a healer when necessity demands it. In the corner of the square, a barber sets out his chair. His tools gleam, each one promising both pain and relief. He sharpens a razor with smooth precision, humming under his breath. Men line up for shaves, for tooth-pulling, for bloodletting. You watch the first customer tilt his head back, trusting the blade as if it were salvation. Journals from the era make plain that medical knowledge was still tangled in tradition. Doctors argued over theories of balance and heat, while grandmothers trusted what they could see and smell. The poor could not afford apothecaries, so they turned to herbs, prayers, and the occasional charm pinned to a child's shirt. You imagine the mix of hope and fear that filled every household when someone fell ill. A gentle folk belief whispered that the touch of silver could drive away fever. You spot a woman pressing a coin against her daughter's wrist, eyes closed in concentration. The child giggles, unafraid. Belief itself becomes medicine, soothing because it gives the mind something to hold. As you move through the crowd, a sharp cry catches your ear. Two men argue near the fountain. One insists on bleeding a sick relative. The other swears it will kill her. Their voices rise, full of desperation. No one intervenes. Illness in this world is both intimate and public. It belongs to everyone and to no one. Interpretations of these practices vary sharply among experts. Some modern historians see them as ignorance preserved by fear. Others view them as acts of quiet ingenuity, proof that ordinary people created systems of care when science refused to reach them. Listening to the noise around you, it feels less like folly and more like defiance, the will to heal despite the odds. You pass a convent near the end of the street. A young nun kneels by the doorway, offering water to a man coughing weakly into his sleeve. Her hands move with calm efficiency. The smell of herbs and vinegar lingers on her robes. She murmurs a prayer over him, and for a moment his breathing steadies. Faith, here, fills the gaps where medicine falters. Inside the convent walls, shelves are lined with jars labelled in looping script: valerian, chamomile, mint, rosewater. The air is sweet, almost dizzying. A sister smiles and offers you a small cloth soaked in lavender, saying softly that it eases headaches. Her kindness feels more potent than any tincture. Later, you pass through an alley where a man sells dried frogs and powders of strange origin. He insists they protect against the plague. Though the plague has not visited in years, people still buy them. Fear does not fade just because the danger has gone. You think of how every generation invents its own medicine, its own comfort. A sudden shout draws your attention. Down the street, a carriage has stopped, and a physician in a dark coat steps out. His presence commands silence. The crowd parts as he approaches a nearby house, his assistant carrying polished instruments in a velvet case. He speaks softly to the family, waiting at the door, then disappears inside. No one dares follow. The aura of learning, rare and distant, surrounds him like a second cloak. Civic archives in Paris indicate that physicians of the upper ranks often charged more than a labourer earned in a month. To call a doctor was to gamble wealth against mortality. You picture the family now, counting coins as they pray that science will spare their child. The thought leaves a hollow ache in your chest. The drizzle returns as you walk away. The air smells of wet stone and herbs crushed underfoot. In the dim light, you notice a beggar offering small sachets of dried lavender, claiming they protect against sickness. You buy one, though you know it is nothing more than fragrant reassurance. Still, you tie it to your wrist, grateful for the comfort it brings. Evening approaches. The doctor's cart is gone, the barber's chair empty. The streets fall quiet except for the rain. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs, then laughs weakly. Life, fragile and persistent, continues. You breathe in the scent of damp earth and fading incense, realizing that in this century, health is not a certainty but a prayer, one whispered daily, over soup, over herbs, over hope. The rain passes during the night, leaving the city washed but not clean. You wake to the faint smell of smoke mingled with something sour and unmistakably human. Paris breathes heavily after a storm. Its gutters gleam with rainwater that has swept along every secret the streets could not hide. You pull your cloak tighter as you step outside, your boots sinking into soft mud that gives off a faint stink of decay. Hygiene, or what passes for it, rules this world differently. Surviving household manuals of the period suggest that most people bathed rarely, some only a few times a year. Cleanliness was measured by linen, not by skin. A fresh shirt signified purity more than water ever could. You pass a woman hanging laundry on a rope stretched across an alley. The fabric glows white in the morning light, a fragile flag of decency amid the grime. In the distance, a perfume seller arranges glass bottles on a wooden cart. The air fills with notes of rose, orange peel, and something musky that clings to the throat. Fragrance has become armor in this world, a polite lie against the truth of odor. It is said that even the king at Versailles preferred clouds of scent to soap. The streets below his palace imitate him as best they can. A cheerful local proverb insisted that perfume could silence sin. You smile at that, imagining people hiding guilt behind clouds of amber and jasmine. Perhaps scent does what water cannot wash away: shame instead of dirt. As you walk toward the river, the smell sharpens. The Seine carries the city's memory, and today it smells of fish, mud, and waste. Men empty chamber pots into its current with practiced ease, while washerwomen slap linen against stones nearby. The rhythm of their work is steady, almost musical. Water cleans and contaminates in the same moment. Travelers' notes from the provinces mention how outsiders often found Paris unbearable in summer. The heat intensified every odor, turning streets into invisible storms of sweat, dung, and smoke. Yet for those who lived here, the smells were part of the landscape, as familiar as the bells or the bread. You begin to understand that the nose learns survival long before the stomach does. A peculiar etiquette rule insisted that one should carry a handkerchief soaked in vinegar or herbs when walking through crowded places. You take yours from your sleeve and inhale. The sharpness cuts through the air like light through fog. Around you, others do the same, pressing cloths to their faces as they pass through the marketplace. The gesture is both practical and graceful, a dance of self-preservation. Public fountains gurgle in the squares, their basins carved with angels now streaked black with age. Women fill pitchers, balancing them against their hips with easy strength. Children splash nearby, shrieking with delight. Clean water exists, but it is precious. Most wells draw from the same underground veins that feed the sewers. You wonder how anyone has survived this long. Letters preserved in convent archives describe how nuns taught basic hygiene to the poor, washing hands before meals, changing bandages, airing bedding in the sun. Their advice spread slowly, resisted more by poverty than ignorance. Soap was costly, and warm water rarer still, yet even small rituals of cleanliness carried dignity. To wash one's face was to reclaim a little peace from the chaos outside. People whispered a hopeful charm saying that lavender smoke kept sickness away. You see it now, curling from a window above you, thin and sweet. The scent mingles with frying onions from a kitchen below, creating something strangely comforting. Perhaps the charm works after all, if only because it soothes the heart. The perfume seller from earlier has moved closer to the fountain. His bottles glint like jewels in the sun. He spritzes a passerby, who laughs and drops a coin into his hand. Perfume has become a form of hope, bottled and sold by the ounce. You catch a hint of something floral drifting through the air and follow it without meaning to. Modern analysts continue to differ on how people of this century truly understood cleanliness. Some claim it was symbolic, tied to morality rather than hygiene. Others see it as pragmatic adaptation to limited resources. Standing here, you sense that both ideas might be true. The French of the 18th century cleaned what they could and perfumed what they could not. A sudden gust of wind brings the smell of horses and smoke from the stables near the bridge. The odor is overwhelming at first, but soon fades into background noise. The senses adjust quickly when there is no choice. You look up at the sky and notice how clear it has become, the air sparkling after rain. Even the filthiest city has its moments of grace. You pass a row of houses along the riverbank. From open windows hang rugs, sheets, and blankets airing out in the sun. The colors ripple in the breeze, soft and faded from years of washing. A woman leans on the sill, her sleeves rolled up, humming softly as she beats a rug with a stick. Dust rises in golden clouds that catch the light like smoke from incense. Civic reports from the time note that the first street cleaning crews appeared sporadically in the 1770 seconds, though their work was as much ceremony as sanitation. A few men with carts and brooms could not conquer centuries of filth, but they gave the illusion of order. You picture them sweeping the edges of chaos, a fragile gesture toward modernity. By late afternoon, the air shifts again. The river's stench softens into something almost sweet. A faint breeze carries hints of bread and rain. The city exhales, and you walk through its breath, aware that behind every fragrance lies the ghost of what it hides. Cleanliness here is not the absence of dirt, but the art of forgetting it. As twilight deepens, candles begin to glow in the windows above. Their light wavers, soft and golden, flickering against the evening haze. You pause on the bridge, watching reflections shimmer in the water. The city looks peaceful from this angle, its smells muted by distance, its filth turned to shadow. Beauty and decay share the same skin, and in this moment, both seem strangely divine. You take a final breath of the scented air, heavy with life, and continue walking as the first stars appear. Somewhere, a bell rings vespers, and the sound floats across the river, blending with the whisper of the current. The night feels clean in its own way, washed not by soap or rain, but by silence. Morning returns soft and gold, glinting on puddles that have not yet dried. You rise early, for today you will travel. The air smells of wet straw and horses, the perfume of departure. You stand at the edge of the road while a carriage driver checks his wheels, muttering under his breath. A rooster crows somewhere behind you, as if offering one last reminder of home. Travel, in this age, is an act of patience and faith. Roads wind like veins across France, paved in mud and hope. A journey of 30 miles might take a full day, and that is if luck is kind. Parish bulletins often reminded travellers to carry both bread and courage. You tuck a crust into your pocket, certain you will need both. The driver shouts that it is time. You climb into the wooden carriage beside a merchant and his snoring dog. The seat is rough, the air thick with hay, and the faint smell of sweat. Outside, the wheels groan as they begin to turn. The motion rocks you gently at first. Then with bone-deep rhythm, you settle in, watching the countryside unfold like an old painting. The fields are wide and wet with dew. Farmers bend to their work, their movements slow and steady. In the distance, church towers rise like quiet exclamation marks across the hills. The sun lifts higher, and the world warms. You can hear birds, the creak of leather harnesses, and the low murmur of hooves against dirt. It is a symphony of motion, both ancient and fragile. One rustic expression hinted that a traveller's luck depended on the first person they met after leaving home. You remember that the baker had smiled at you as you passed, and you take it as a good omen. The merchant beside you laughs when you tell him, saying he once turned back halfway to Rouen because the first face he saw was a tax collector's. The superstition feels foolish and comforting all at once. As the road winds upward, the carriage slows. A soldier on horseback rides past, nodding politely. The driver mutters something about toll gates ahead. Sure enough, within minutes, you see them. Wooden barriers painted red and white, guarded by two men in dusty uniforms. They wave you down, collecting coins with the weary precision of those who do this all day. Civic archives from provincial offices reveal that France before the revolution was stitched together by tolls and taxes. Every bridge, every road, every gate demanded payment. You think of the peasants who must walk instead, their feet blistered, their journeys endless. The kingdom seems to feed on movement itself. The road narrows again as you pass through a forest. The air grows damp and cool, filled with the scent of moss and pine. Shafts of light fall through the branches, painting the ground in shifting patterns. The merchant dozes, his dog snoring softly against his knee. For a while, the only sounds are the creak of the wheels and the steady rhythm of hooves. An old wives' tale used to say that whistling in a forest invited spirits to follow you. You almost try it just to test the story, but stop yourself. The silence feels alive, and you decide not to tempt whatever might be listening. The forest thins at last, giving way to rolling fields and a village in the distance. Smoke rises from chimneys, and the faint smell of baking bread reaches you even here. You pass a group of travellers walking beside the road, their shoes caked with mud. One woman carries a baby wrapped in a shawl, its tiny hand gripping her sleeve. They nod as you pass, their faces kind but tired. Travellers' notes from the time often mention the mixture of generosity and danger found on the open road. Inns offered rest but not always safety. Strangers might share food or steal it. The journey itself was a gamble with weather, wheels, and chance. You tighten your cloak as a gust of wind brushes your face, wondering what stories the road will collect from you by day's end. At midday, the carriage stops at a posting inn. The smell of hay mingles with stew drifting from the kitchen. Horses snort impatiently, while stable boys shout and laugh. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and talk. You share a table with other travellers, each with a story to tell. A priest bound for Chartres, a widow visiting her son, a musician heading toward Paris with a violin wrapped in cloth. Their voices weave together like threads in a tapestry of wandering lives. A curious etiquette rule insisted that travellers should never speak of the road ahead while eating, lest they summon bad luck. The priest laughs softly and breaks the rule on purpose, describing a stretch of flooded road he barely crossed last spring. Everyone groans, then clinks mugs for courage. You smile, feeling yourself part of the strange fellowship that hunger and motion create. When you return to the carriage, clouds have gathered. Rain begins to fall in soft, persistent drops. The wheels splash through puddles, and mud streaks your boots. The merchant wraps his cloak around the dog, who sighs as if resigned to the journey. The scent of wet earth fills the air, heavy but clean. Some historians question whether travel in this era truly united France or only deepened its divisions. Roads connected people, but also carried news of inequality, hunger, and unrest. Watching the countryside slide past, you suspect both are true. The road brings the kingdom together just enough to remind everyone how far apart they remain. As evening nears, the rain slows. The clouds part to reveal a faint sunset, pale pink bleeding into silver. You lean out the window, letting the wind cool your face. The road glistens behind you, a ribbon of light fading into distance. The carriage crests a hill, and for a moment, The view stretches endless fields, forests, and tiny villages, glowing in the last light of day. You breathe deeply, the air smelling of damp leaves and wood smoke. Travel here is more than movement. It is meditation, a reminder that the world is larger and quieter than the walls we build within it. As darkness falls, the driver lights a lantern, its glow bouncing off the wet road. The wheels turn slower now, the dog asleep once more. You rest your head against the window and watch the stars blink to life above the trees. Every jolt, every creak, feels like part of a lullaby written by the road itself. You close your eyes, carried forward into the night, trusting that somehow the path will always find its end. Morning settles gently over the rooftops, bringing with it the faint chiming of church bells and the low rumble of voices stirring in nearby taverns. You walk along a cobbled street, still damp from dew, the air cool and clean enough to sharpen your thoughts. A breeze stirs scraps of paper across the ground, pamphlets, letters, maybe bits of news torn from yesterday's conversation. This is a city that breathes in words. You stop at a corner where a man stands on a wooden crate, reading aloud from a printed sheet. His voice is steady, his tone almost theatrical. Around him, people listen with half smiles and skeptical eyes. The news travels quickly now, carried by ink and rumour in equal measure. Letters exchanged at the time hint that Paris lived on gossip as much as on bread. From noble salons to smoky taverns, words carried weight. To speak too freely could invite danger, yet silence was impossible in a city so alive with curiosity. You feel that tension even now, the thrill of knowing and the fear of being known. The reader finishes his announcement and folds the paper neatly, tucking it under his arm. As the crowd disperses, fragments of conversation linger. Talk of new taxes, talk of the king, talk of an arrest. No one fully understands. You catch snippets as you pass, each sentence a spark waiting for tinder. One curious superstition maintained that gossip itself could bring misfortune if spoken near running water. People believed the current would carry the words farther than intended, twisting them into curses. You think of the Seine, how it winds through the city like a restless listener, and wonder how many secrets it has swallowed. You step into a coffee house tucked between two narrow buildings. Inside, the air hums with argument and steam. Men in wigs lean close over newspapers, their voices quick and layered. The smell of roasted beans fills the room, rich and slightly bitter. Coffee is a new kind of courage here, the fuel of thought, rebellion, and endless debate. Contemporary pamphlets reveal that these coffeehouses were the true engines of conversation. Writers, lawyers, and merchants gathered in smoky corners, trading ideas that could change the world or ruin a man before sunset. Words became currency. Opinions were traded like coins. You take a seat by the window, listening as one man reads a letter from London, while another mocks a politician by name. At a nearby table, two women sit with notebooks open. They write quickly, glancing up now and then. One pauses to laugh, the sound light but deliberate. You realize they are composing satire, tiny daggers hidden in clever rhymes. A few heads turn, listening carefully. In this world, humor can be as dangerous as fire. Modern researchers still puzzle over how much the printed word shaped revolution before it began. Some say pamphlets simply gave voice to what already burned in people's hearts. Others believe they lit the flame themselves. You can feel both truths vibrating in this room, in every whispered argument and every raised brow. The waiter brings you a small porcelain cup, dark liquid swirling inside. You sip and taste, bitterness edged with sweetness, the flavor of thought itself. It warms you in a way wine cannot. Around you, voices rise again, weaving together like threads of a single restless mind. Outside, the sound of hooves echoes along the street. A courier rides past, his cloak flapping behind him. Letters travel faster now than they once did, connecting cities that used to feel like separate worlds. News from Lyon or Marseille arrives within days, sometimes hours. The country grows smaller even as unrest grows larger. Eyewitness accounts suggest that people read aloud in taverns so that even the illiterate could share the thrill of new ideas. The reading became performance, part theatre, part sermon. You imagine a crowded room, candles sputtering, a young man standing on a chair declaring that truth belongs to everyone. For a moment, belief must have felt like electricity. You finish your drink and step outside again. The street feels brighter, sharper. Someone nearby is singing a song about a baker and a tax collector, the tune cheerful and biting at once. The lyrics have been altered so many times that no one remembers the original version. Songs, like rumors, evolve faster than truth. You pause at a bookshop window, where pamphlets are stacked like cards in a game. The titles make you smile. Letters from Nowhere, The Honest Citizen, The King's Shadow. Their edges are smudged from hundreds of hands. The bookseller glances up and nods, his smile sly and knowing. You can tell he sells ideas as carefully as others sell jewels. By afternoon, the air grows heavy with heat. You walk toward the river, where people gather along the banks, their talk soft and scattered. A group of students argue about philosophers. Two washerwomen whisper about an affair that everyone already knows. The murmur of voices blends with the sound of water lapping against stone. A fisherman beside you mutters that words are like fish, you can catch them, but you never know what they'll turn into once they're on the hook. The metaphor makes you laugh quietly. Perhaps he understands more about politics than he realizes. As the sun dips lower, you find yourself at the edge of the Pont Neuf. The city glows gold in the fading light, and you can hear a storyteller beginning his performance. His voice rises above the crowd, clear and rhythmic. The tale is half truth, half invention, but no one minds. People lean closer, drawn by the melody of language itself. Old parish logs show that even during times of hardship, crowds gathered nightly for stories like this. The spoken word was a kind of collective heartbeat, reminding everyone that imagination still belonged to them. You stand and listen until the story ends, the final line disappearing into applause. When darkness falls, lanterns flicker to life across the bridge. You walk home slowly, your thoughts humming with all you have heard. News, gossip, poetry, debate, they blur together into something more powerful than any one truth. Words here are alive, and tonight they have carried you farther than any road could. The night fades into a soft dawn, pale and silvery over tiled rooftops. The streets smell faintly of bread again, mingled with damp stone and the smoke of early fires. You wake to the hush of a quieter Paris, a city still half asleep, and feel the weight of gentler thoughts settling around you. Today your path winds through the private world of affection, marriage, and manners, where hearts beat beneath corsets and expectations. A few streets away, church bells ring, calling the faithful and the curious alike. You walk slowly toward the square where couples pass arm in arm, skirts brushing cobblestones, voices low and careful. Some walk with true tenderness, others out of duty. Marriage here is not the meeting of souls, but the alignment of fortunes. Records from provincial notaries reveal that love was often written into contracts long before it appeared in hearts. Every union required signatures, witnesses, and calculations. A dowry might consist of coins, linen, a goat, or a piece of land. Romance arrived later, if it arrived at all. You imagine the silence that followed wedding feasts, two strangers lying side by side beneath the same quilt, breathing the same uncertainty. At the edge of the square, a matchmaker calls to passers-by, her voice cheerful and persuasive. She carries a small ledger bound in worn leather. Inside are names, ages, trades, and fortunes, arranged like a catalogue of lives waiting to be sorted. A woman stops to ask about her niece. The matchmaker smiles, scribbling notes. You watch the exchange and realize that in this world, even love requires accounting. Among the poorer classes, the rituals are simpler but no less meaningful. Couples meet at fairs, at church steps, or while fetching water at dawn. An old custom still holds that when a man gives a woman an apple on the feast of St. Catherine, it is a promise of marriage. You imagine the sweetness of such a moment, the quiet bravery it takes to hope with so little to offer. Contemporary letters suggest that intimacy, when it bloomed, did so quietly behind closed doors. Affection was expressed through gestures rather than words. A shared loaf, a mended shirt, a hand briefly resting on another's sleeve. Love, in a time of hunger, had to be practical. The poets wrote verses of passion, but ordinary people wove their tenderness out of patience. One odd belief from the countryside insisted that a woman could ensure her husband's fidelity by sewing a single strand of her hair into his coat lining. The act was secret, the meaning sacred. Whether it worked or not hardly mattered. It gave the heart something to hold when certainty was impossible. You pass through a narrow street lined with shops selling ribbons, gloves, and lace. These are tokens of courtship, small luxuries that carry promises more dangerous than gold. A young man in a plain coat stands before one of the windows, turning a handkerchief over in his hands. His reflection stares back, pale and uncertain. Perhaps it is for the woman he cannot yet afford to marry. Eyewitness diaries describe how Parisian salons, ruled by clever women, became theatres of wit, where flirtation was a kind of language. Words replaced touch, compliments disguised desire, and laughter masked rebellion. You can almost hear it now, echoing through bright rooms filled with perfume and candlelight, where intellect itself became seductive. An endearing superstition whispered among maids claimed that if you placed a sprig of rosemary under your pillow, you would dream of your true love. You picture them lying in shared dormitories, eyes closed, waiting for faces to appear in their sleep. Even in a century ruled by reason, dreams refuse to surrender to logic. Modern historians view these customs with a mix of admiration and skepticism. Some describe them as strategies of survival within a system designed to confine. Others see them as acts of quiet resistance, where tenderness itself became rebellion. Listening to the footsteps and voices around you, you sense that both ideas fit. Love here is both cage and key. In the wealthier districts, carriages wait outside houses where couples dine by candlelight. Inside, silver reflects faces polished into composure. Husbands discuss politics. Wives sip wine and smile carefully. Servants move silently, carrying dishes heavy with sauces and pretense. You imagine how lonely grandeur must feel when affection has been traded for influence. A servant girl slips outside, pausing in the alley to breathe. Her hands are red from washing crystal, her hair damp with heat. A young stable boy appears at the corner, grinning shyly. They exchange a few words and laugh before he disappears again. The moment is brief, but it glows brighter than all the chandeliers inside. Letters found in family archives reveal that many marriages endured more out of duty than devotion. Yet hidden among the formal declarations, historians have found notes scribbled in the margins. Little jokes, lines of poetry, clumsy sketches of hearts. Even in the strictest homes, love found a way to whisper. You pass by a small chapel where two people stand before the altar, hands trembling as they exchange vows. The priest's voice rises softly, steady as the candle flame beside him. A few relatives watch from the pews, their expressions unreadable. The moment feels fragile, beautiful in its sincerity. When the couple steps outside, the groom lifts his hat and kisses his new wife on the forehead. The gesture is tender, modest, and real. The sun begins to set, painting the rooftops in copper light. The scent of baking bread mingles with rose petals scattered from a nearby window. Somewhere, laughter bursts from an open door, and a child calls after it. The air feels full of life, of longing, of the thousand small hopes that keep a society breathing, even under its rules. You stop at a fountain and watch the ripples shimmer. Love, it seems, moves like that water, clear when still, distorted when disturbed, always searching for a way forward. You dip your hand in and let the coolness run through your fingers. The day ends quietly, and in the fading light, you understand that affection, in this age, was not loud, but enduring, a candle that refused to go out, even in the wind. The first light of morning filters through tall windows, painting the floor in faint gold. You find yourself standing at the servants' entrance of a grand house, where the world of splendor meets the world that makes it possible. The air here smells of polish, ash, and bread just pulled from the oven. Somewhere above, a bell rings, one tone for the kitchen, two for the upstairs hall, three for the ladies' chamber. The day begins before the masters even open their eyes. Parish accounts and household ledgers show that large estates in 18th century France employed entire armies of invisible hands. Cooks, maids, coachmen, gardeners, valets, and laundresses each lived by the rhythm of someone else's comfort. Their work was quiet but relentless, performed beneath chandeliers whose light they were never meant to enjoy. In the kitchen, fire crackles and iron pots hiss. A cook in a stained apron shouts instructions, her wooden spoon tapping against the rim of a copper pot. The scent of onions and butter fills the room, thick and comforting. A young scullery boy scurries past, carrying kindling, his bare feet silent on the stone floor. You can feel the pulse of labor here, a steady heartbeat that powers the entire house. A gentle folk belief whispered among servants said that whistling near the bread oven would make the dough rise faster. The kitchen maid hums instead, soft and tuneless, perhaps honoring that superstition without quite believing it. You watch her smile faintly as the loaves begin to swell beneath the cloth. Even small magic feels worth keeping when one's days belong to duty. You follow a maid up a narrow staircase, the air cooler as you climb. At the top, the corridor opens into brightness. Sunlight slips through embroidered curtains, glinting on mirrors and polished brass. This is the upper world, where footsteps are light and voices softer. She moves quickly, adjusting chairs, shaking out linens, straightening ribbons on the dressing table. Her motions are graceful from repetition, a kind of choreography learned through years of service. Letters from noble households reveal that servants often knew their masters more intimately than their own families. They dressed them, fed them, tended their illnesses, and heard every whisper that walls could not keep. Loyalty was expected, invisibility demanded. To be a servant was to exist and not exist, to know everything and say nothing. In the drawing room, a valet polishes silver until it gleams like water. He pauses once to inspect his reflection, then returns to work. Across the hall, the butler counts bottles in the wine cellar, his lips moving silently as he checks each mark on the ledger. Order is their faith, precision, their prayer. A curious domestic habit in grand houses required that servants never walk directly behind their masters. Instead, they moved at an angle, always slightly to the side, so they could serve without shadowing authority. You watch this quiet geometry unfold as two footmen carry in trays, their movements timed like music. The balance of respect and fear seems woven into the walls themselves. In the ladies' chamber, a maid gently laces a corset. The sound of the fabric tightening echoes faintly. The mistress stands tall, her hands resting on a chair carved with gilded flowers. She does not speak, though her eyes meet yours in the mirror. For a moment, it feels as if she knows you are watching, as if she senses the silent weight of eyes that do not belong to her class. Contemporary letters written by domestic workers describe how service was both survival and imprisonment. To live in a fine house meant food and shelter, but also the surrender of time, dignity, and even thought. One letter ends with the line, "We breathe their air and must pretend it is enough." You can almost hear the weariness behind those words. In the garden below, the gardener trims hedges into perfect shapes. He pauses now and then to wipe his brow. The estate's children play nearby, their laughter floating above the hum of bees. The gardener smiles, half proud and half distant, knowing the joy of the scene will end when his workday does. Scholars re-examining personal diaries from this period suggest that bonds of affection sometimes grew between masters and servants, though they were rarely spoken aloud. Gratitude and dependence blurred into something fragile and unnameable. You see it in the way the lady's maid straightens her mistress' collar with care that feels almost maternal. By midday, the household moves with quiet rhythm. The dining room glows in candlelight, though the sun is still high. Silver gleams, glasses sparkle, and every dish must arrive in perfect order. The servants move silently between rooms, their faces calm though sweat beads at their temples. Upstairs, laughter rings faintly through the corridors, light, distant, oblivious. An odd superstition among footmen claimed that spilling wine on the tablecloth foretold quarrels before nightfall. When one young boy stumbles and splashes a drop, he freezes, wide-eyed. The butler's glare silences him, but an older maid quietly slips him a piece of bread in comfort. Small kindness survives even under watchful eyes. In the evening, the house softens. The masters dine in elegance, the servants in the kitchen on leftovers that taste almost as good. Conversation hums in both places, but only one will be remembered. A few songs rise softly among the lower voices, laughter mixed with exhaustion. Someone jokes that the silver cutlery eats better than they do. Later, when the guests have gone and the candles burn low, the servants begin their final rounds. Floors are swept, fires banked, doors locked. The cook wipes her hands on her apron and sighs. The scullery boy curls up near the hearth and drifts to sleep. The house settles into silence, its splendor resting on weary shoulders. Standing at the doorway, you take one last look inside. The chandeliers have gone dark, but the kitchen still glows faintly with embers. This world of quiet endurance feels both distant and familiar. You breathe in the scent of wax and bread, and understand that history is often written by those who command it but carried forward by those who clean its floors. The morning opens grey and restless. You wake to the sound of carts rumbling past, and the sharp cry of a vendor shouting about bread. The scent of yeast and smoke drifts through the air, and you feel the quiet hunger that has been echoing through France for years. The people talk about weather, harvest, and luck, but underneath it all runs the same word, whispered like prayer and threat alike: bread. Documents kept in royal archives make it clear that the price of grain ruled more lives than the king himself. Every rise and fall in the cost of flour could shift the mood of the entire country. A loaf was not simply food, but proof of justice or its absence. Families counted days by crusts, and when the shelves of bakers grew thin, tempers thickened. You walk toward the bakery, joining a line that already winds into the street. Faces are patient but strained. A woman behind you murmurs that the flour this week is coarser, the dough heavier. A man in front clutches a small coin pouch, as if it were a beating heart. The smell of fresh loaves floats from the doorway, warm and golden, almost cruel in its perfection. It was once said among washerwomen that bread baked during a storm would never rise, for even the dough could feel despair. You think of that as thunder grumbles faintly in the distance. Superstition, perhaps, but it feels true here. Hunger has moods. It listens. Inside the bakery, the air is thick and hot. Flour drifts like mist, catching the light. The baker moves quickly, sweat gleaming on his arms, his face flushed with exhaustion. He places loaves on the counter one by one, his expression unreadable. Each sale feels like confession, each coin like absolution. A child begins to cry softly, hushed by a tired mother who hands over her last few sous. Paintings from the time freeze moments just like this. Women in shawls, men in worn coats, hands outstretched toward bread that glows like treasure. Artists saw in these scenes not poverty alone but devotion. The act of waiting transformed into something sacred. You feel it too, standing here, the quiet reverence of people who have known hunger too long to mock hope. A baker's assistant whispers that the supply came late from the mill again. The grain was damp from the rain, the dough temperamental. He shrugs helplessly. Behind him, sacks stand half empty, white dust spilling like snow. It is easy to imagine how a single bad season could shatter the fragile rhythm of this street. Later, historians approach this story with caution. Some blame droughts and poor harvests, others blame hoarding and greed. Yet the truth seems simpler. When food becomes currency, compassion turns expensive. You think of how easily hunger can turn from silence to rage. As you leave the bakery, clutching a small loaf warm in your hands, the sky begins to brighten. You pass a group of workers sharing their breakfast, bread torn into pieces and dipped in watered wine. They laugh, their joy almost defiant. The sound feels like sunlight breaking through clouds. Letters from traveling merchants describe how bread riots could erupt without warning. One day, a marketplace hums with ordinary talk. The next, it swells with shouting. Women often led these uprisings, voices fierce and clear. They carried their children on their hips and demanded fairness in the only language left to them. You picture it now, the courage of desperation filling the air like thunder. Superstitious neighbors promised good fortune if one gave a beggar a crumb from the first loaf baked on Sunday. You see an old woman do just that, pressing a crust into a stranger's hand. He bows, murmurs, thanks, and tucks it carefully into his pocket. Perhaps it is luck, or perhaps it is the only kindness he will taste today. By afternoon, the scent of bread fades, replaced by the smell of smoke and rain. The line outside the bakery is gone, but the feeling lingers like an ache in the air. You walk along the river, seeing others do the same. Loaves wrapped in cloth, guarded like treasure. Along the quay, a group of dock workers sit on overturned barrels, sharing their lunch. One speaks of his cousin in Lyon who cannot find work. Another talks about taxes so heavy they crush his father's farm. The conversation drifts naturally to food, always back to food. You realize hunger has become the nation's shared language. A priest passing by pauses to bless them. They bow their heads respectfully but do not stop eating. Blessings cannot fill a stomach, but manners endure even now. The priest walks on, his robe brushing the stones. Old merchant records leave little doubt that rising grain prices foreshadowed something greater than famine. Anger was growing, quiet but persistent, like yeast in warm dough. You can feel it swelling beneath the calm of the afternoon. The rain begins again as you reach the edge of the city. Smoke rises from small fires where families roast whatever scraps they have. A mother hums softly as she feeds her child, tearing bread into smaller pieces to make it last longer. The melody is gentle, almost a lullaby. You stand for a while, listening. Perhaps this is what endurance looks like. Quiet hands dividing what little there is, turning survival into ceremony. You take one last bite of your loaf, its crust gone hard in the damp air. It tastes of ash, salt, and sorrow, but also of something stronger that words cannot name. As darkness falls, the city curls inward again. The ovens will cool, the lines will return tomorrow, and life will continue at the mercy of grain and sky. Somewhere beyond these walls, nobles dine on sugar and cream, unaware that the simplest food in their kingdom has become both weapon and prayer. You walk on, the empty paper wrapping fluttering in your hand like a flag of quiet rebellion. The rain returns during the night, soft and steady, washing the dust from the streets. By morning the sky is pale, the kind of light that makes everything seem new again even when nothing has changed. You rise early and find yourself drawn toward the river, where the heart of the city hums beneath its bridges. Water always tells the truth about a place. Old civic plans preserved in Parisian archives reveal how the Seine was both lifeline and waste pit, its waters carrying bread, barrels, gossip, and disease all at once. Barges drifted past with their sails half lowered, creaking under the weight of wood, stone, or wine. Fishermen cast their nets with slow, resigned grace, knowing the river gave and took in equal measure. Near the quay, laundresses work with rolled sleeves, their laughter carrying across the current. The slap of wet cloth against stone keeps time like a drum. The smell is a mixture of soap, mud, and something metallic. A boy whistles nearby as he hauls buckets from the shallows, splashing himself with each step. You can taste the cold dampness in the air as it settles on your lips. A fireside tale told that if you whispered your worries to the river and threw in a sprig of thyme, the current would carry your troubles away. You watch a young woman do exactly that, the small green branch spinning on the surface before vanishing downstream. Around her, life continues, but she stands still a moment longer, as if listening for an answer. Paintings from the time capture the river as both beauty and burden. Artists loved its reflections, the shimmer of light on rippling water, yet what they rarely showed was the stench, the rats, the floating refuse that told the city's less poetic story. You see it now, the contradiction made real, a surface that sparkles while hiding everything underneath. At a nearby bridge, merchants shout over one another. Carts groan with barrels of salt fish and baskets of onions. The sound of bargaining echoes through the arches like a song of survival. The poorest barter with words and gestures when money fails them, offering repairs, labour, or prayers in exchange for a meal. The rhythm of the city depends on these small negotiations. Contemporary witnesses left striking descriptions of the floating washhouses that line the riverbanks. Wooden structures bobbing gently on the current, filled with steam and chatter. From a distance, they looked like strange ships where soap replaced sails. Inside, women worked and gossiped, their conversations weaving together domestic secrets and citywide news. The water beneath them shimmered, carrying away stories that no one dared write down. Superstitious dockworkers claimed that tossing bread crusts into the river would ensure calm waters for a week. You notice a few crusts floating now, soft and swelling in the current. Some habits survive simply because they make people feel seen by forces they cannot control. Modern interpreters read this pattern differently. Some see the rituals and rumors of the river as evidence of a society trying to humanize chaos. Others consider them poetic excuses for neglect. The truth feels somewhere in between. People comfort themselves by giving meaning to what they cannot fix. You walk along the embankment, where lovers stroll hand in hand. Their reflections merge and separate in the wavering light. A barge passes slowly, its captain humming a tune that disappears in the wind. The bridge above you is crowded with children leaning over the rail, dropping pebbles into the water just to watch the ripples bloom. Letters written by travellers that season show that the Seine connected lives far beyond the city. Boats from Normandy brought grain and fish. Barges from Burgundy carried wine. The same river that fed Paris also whispered of other worlds. Standing here, you can feel the faint pull of elsewhere in its flow. An elderly man sits near the water, feeding pigeons from his coat pocket. He hums a song you do not recognize. His hands move slowly, the gestures precise. When you ask what he's feeding them, he smiles and says, "Hope, mostly." The pigeons flutter and scatter, circling above the river before landing again. By late afternoon, the sky deepens to a dull silver. The tide shifts. The air thickens with the smell of rain once more. You pause on the Pont Marie and watch the current sweep past, dark and strong. Somewhere upstream, a bell tolls. The sound vibrates through the water, rippling toward you. You lean on the railing, letting the damp air settle into your skin. The city stretches around you, vast and restless. The Seine moves beneath your feet, timeless and indifferent, yet somehow tender. It has seen kings and beggars, revolutions and weddings, and it keeps moving, carrying every secret gently out to sea. As twilight gathers, lanterns flicker to life along the banks. Their light glows on the surface of the water like small stars. You stay until the last one blurs, until the sound of the river becomes the sound of breathing. The day slips quietly into night, and Paris keeps flowing, eternal and exhausted, along its silver vein. The sun climbs slowly over the rooftops, and you find yourself walking toward the edge of the city, where gardens spread like pockets of calm amid the noise. The air smells faintly of crushed herbs and damp soil. Birds dart between fruit trees, their calls soft and irregular. Here, the world feels gentler, as if time itself has loosened its grip. Parish records from rural estates reveal that gardens were more than decoration. They were survival arranged in rows, feeding both stomach and spirit. Every patch of green held purpose. Cabbages for soup, lavender for scent, mint for fever, and a few bright flowers for the soul's comfort. The poorest households kept theirs in wooden boxes by the door, while nobles built labyrinths of roses for guests to admire. You kneel beside a plot of thyme, rubbing a leaf between your fingers. Its scent releases sharply, filling the air with warmth. The gardener nearby nods approvingly, his back bent from years of work. He says little, but his movements are precise, his care patient. You sense that tending the earth has become its own quiet prayer. It was said among city wives that basil planted near the window would invite good fortune into the home. You glance toward the small clay pots, lined along a stone wall, each one bursting with green. A woman in a linen cap waters them carefully, her face softened by the morning light. The droplets sparkle like tiny jewels before sinking into the soil. Letters from noble estates describe how gardens served as stages of power. Guests wandered along neatly trimmed paths while servants remained invisible behind hedges. The scent of jasmine mingled with candle smoke during evening strolls. For the wealthy, a garden was a performance of peace. For the poor, it was the only piece of heaven within reach. You pass into a wilder corner where vegetables climb crooked trellises and chickens scratch between rows. A boy chases them away with a stick, laughing as they scatter. The smell of hay and damp feathers mixes with the sweetness of ripening pears. It is messy, alive, and utterly human. A fireside proverb once promised that a garden left untended would dream its own harvest. The saying makes you smile. Perhaps the land does remember kindness, storing it deep beneath the frost. The thought lingers as you watch the gardener's hands move across the rows, firm yet tender, guiding each plant toward life. Travel journals from the period describe the growing fascination with botany among educated circles. Gentlemen collected exotic seeds from colonies. Ladies pressed flowers into thick notebooks labeled with Latin names. The Age of Reason had found beauty in petals and roots, naming and categorizing every leaf. You imagine the quiet joy of discovery, the way curiosity turns simple soil into wonder. Not everyone saw gardens as peace. Some modern historians interpret them as symbols of control, miniature kingdoms, where nature bowed to human will. Others read them as acts of defiance, reminders that life could bloom even under oppression. Standing here, you sense both meanings. Each planted seed feels like a small rebellion against chaos. In the center of the garden, a fountain trickles softly. Its basin is green with moss, the stone worn smooth by time. A child dips her hands into the cool water and gasps at the chill. Her mother laughs, wiping her hands on her apron before returning to her basket of beans. Around them, bees drift lazily from flower to flower, humming their endless song. An old gardener hums too as he works. He carries a small pouch of seeds tied at his waist, shaking it now and then as if it were a talisman. When you ask what kind they are, he grins and says, "Hope." The answer feels perfect, needing no further explanation. Paintings from the era often captured scenes like this, simple figures among greenery, the sun slipping low, hands busy with care. Art found poetry in the ordinary. The brush recorded what history often ignored, the quiet persistence of daily joy. By afternoon, the light softens into gold. The gardener wipes his hands, satisfied with his day's work. He sits on a wooden stool and drinks from a tin cup, his eyes fixed on the horizon. You sit beside him in silence, the smell of soil and herbs wrapping around you like an old blanket. A few raindrops begin to fall, soft and harmless. They tap against leaves and ripple across the fountain's surface. The gardener looks up, squints, and smiles. "Let it come," he says. "The earth is thirsty." His words carry a peace you can feel in your chest. As you walk away, the rain deepens. The garden darkens, its colors richer, its scents sharper. The smell of wet lavender follows you down the path. Behind you, the gardener hums again, his tune fading into the rhythm of the rain. The city feels far away now, softened by distance and mist. For a moment, the world is nothing but soil, water, and breath, a reminder that even in a restless century, the simplest acts still hold grace. The day begins quietly, a mist curling low across the rooftops. You follow the distant sound of hooves until you reach a wide square where soldiers stand in uneven rows. The smell of sweat, leather, and iron fills the air. The ground is still damp from rain, and the gleam of metal catches every pale thread of sunlight. You can almost taste the tension, sharp as flint on your tongue. In the surviving ledgers of that decade, one finds traces of how military life shaped every corner of society. The crown demanded loyalty not just from noble officers, but from farmers, craftsmen, and boys, barely grown. Many enlisted for bread, not glory. A soldier's pay could feed a family for a week, and so the uniform became both burden and salvation. You step closer to watch the drill. A sergeant shouts orders with a voice roughened by tobacco and weather. The men move in fits and starts, boots slapping against stone. The rhythm feels wrong, yet they keep trying, knowing precision means survival. At the edge of the square, a drummer boy keeps the beat steady, his small face serious, his hands blistered. Old folk insisted that a soldier who carried a sprig of rosemary in his pocket would always return home alive. You see one man tuck a green stem into his coat before taking his place in line. The scent drifts toward you, clean and hopeful. Perhaps belief itself gives courage where reason falters. Nearby, a group of women sell bread and cider from baskets. Their laughter breaks through the shouts, softening the air for a moment. A girl presses a piece of fruit into a soldier's hand. He smiles shyly, thanks her, and hides it away as if it were treasure. Even in this world of drills and duty, kindness finds its way in. People who walked these streets once recalled that military parades were as common as markets. Flags rippled above the crowd, and children stared wide-eyed at the horses, pretending they were kings. To see an army pass was to feel both pride and dread, a reminder that peace was only a pause between marches. The captain, tall and composed, moves among his men, adjusting collars, nodding approval. His coat gleams with brass buttons, his boots spotless. Behind him, the older veterans stand straighter, their scars hidden under worn fabric. One has lost 3 fingers, another a piece of ear, yet they grin like men who have seen the inside of eternity and come back laughing. Country grandmothers swore by the rule that a woman should never step over a musket lying on the ground, for it might wake the spirit of war. You notice one mother quietly guide her child around a stack of weapons, as if the warning still holds power. Fear and reverence weave together in small gestures like that, preserving caution through habit. Travellers of the time could not help noticing how soldiers became both admired and pitied. They were visible in every town square, yet invisible when peace returned. Some begged, others drank, a few found work as guards or drivers. Their medals gleamed in the sun, but hunger glimmered just beneath. Researchers who study daily life interpret the evidence differently. Some view the army as a tool of discipline that bound peasants to obedience. Others see it as a ladder of opportunity, where courage could sometimes outweigh birth. Watching the men march in rhythm now, you feel both arguments breathing in step. A bugle sounds. The men turn sharply, faces set. The sound slices through the morning like a blade, echoing off the stone walls. Even the birds fall silent. When the noise fades, the soldiers relax, laughter creeping back, like light after a storm. The sergeant mutters something about glory costing too much sleep, and the men nod knowingly. In a corner of the square, a veteran tells a story to a group of boys. His voice is low, but his gestures are grand. He speaks of cold nights and muddy boots, of comrades lost and battles survived. The boys listen as if hearing a legend. When he finishes, they clap politely, not realizing the story is true. An engraving made by a patient hand shows the same scene frozen in time. Soldiers lined up, the city behind them, the river glinting in the distance. You look at the real thing now and realize how stillness lies to memory. No picture can hold the smell, the sound, the tremor of breath before command. As afternoon settles, the soldiers disperse. Some head for taverns, others to their barracks. The square empties, leaving behind the echo of boots and a faint trail of dust. You stand alone for a while, watching sunlight glint on puddles where helmets had reflected moments ago. Perhaps the truth, as always, hides between memory and myth. These men carry both the glory of a nation and the weariness of its price. You breathe in the scent of rosemary still lingering in the air, then turn to leave, the echo of the drum fading slowly behind you. The wind shifts again, carrying with it the scent of paper, wax, and dust. You walk along a narrow lane lined with shuttered shops until the street opens into a quiet courtyard. A large building looms ahead, its stone facade marked by time and soot. This is the Royal Post Office, the nerve centre of communication for a country that still believes every secret can be sealed with wax. From the lines of forgotten letters, it is clear that correspondence shaped how 18th century France thought, loved, and schemed. In an age before telegraphs and trains, news travelled by horse and hand, each letter an object of patience and hope. The speed of affection, rumour, or command depended on the weather and the health of a rider's horse. You step inside, and the world smells of ink and candle smoke. Clerks bend over long tables, sealing envelopes with melted wax, stamping them with crests and initials. Shelves behind them groan with stacked parcels and folded papers tied in ribbon. The air hums with the rhythm of scratching quills. Children used to chant a rhyme, claiming that every sealed letter carried a whisper from heaven, while every unposted one trapped a sigh. You hear the rhyme in your mind as a young clerk sets aside a pile of letters marked, "To be delivered by dawn." His fingers move quickly, but his face looks tired. The promise of words is heavy work. At a side desk, a postmaster inspects routes on a large map, tracing lines with his finger. Each line represents days, sometimes weeks, of travel. Couriers leave at midnight, at dawn, and at dusk, crossing muddy roads that swallow hooves and wheels. The sound of their arrival and departure keeps this building breathing. People who lived through the century remembered the anxiety of waiting for letters. Some were love notes from soldiers, others decrees that could ruin a life. A single folded sheet carried both intimacy and judgment. The wax seal was the only protection against strangers' eyes, yet everyone knew curiosity had many disguises. Farmhands joked half seriously that letters carried the smell of the sender's house. Lovers pressed flowers between pages so that distance might still have fragrance. A merchant you pass in the hall sniffs an opened letter before reading, perhaps hoping for more than words. The gesture makes you smile in spite of yourself. Near the back wall, a small boy sorts correspondence under the watchful eye of an older clerk. The boy hums softly as he works, creating a fragile kind of music among the rustle of parchment. You realize that this place is not just an office, but a living archive of breath, emotion, and trust. Travellers of the time could not help noticing how the post roads changed the rhythm of the countryside. Villages built around relay stations came alive at night, lit by lanterns and stirred by hoofbeats. Inns flourished. Gossip flourished faster. The post turned strangers into neighbours and turned neighbours into informants. An evening habit turned almost sacred suggested that anyone who received bad news should burn a candle beside the letter before reading it. The ritual, it was said, softened whatever pain might follow. You think of that now as a woman near the window breaks a wax seal with trembling fingers, her eyes darting across the page. When she finishes, she exhales, folds the letter again, and lights the stub of a candle beside it. The flame flickers, steadying her hands. The ink of old reports still speaks quietly about censorship and suspicion. Government offices sometimes opened private letters, copying the contents before resealing them. Words that should have travelled in secrecy instead found their way into archives of control. You can feel that faint unease in the air, like perfume gone sour. Academic voices continue to diverge when explaining why the written word held such dangerous power. Some argue that literacy spread faster than trust. Others claim that the habit of writing taught ordinary people to think privately for the first time. Both ideas seem right. Every envelope here contains the pulse of an awakening mind. You wander toward the doorway as dusk gathers. Couriers prepare to ride out again, lanterns swinging from their saddles. The air outside smells of rain and horse sweat. A rider adjusts his gloves, glances at you once, then spurs forward into the darkness, carrying hundreds of stories tucked under his arm. Behind you, the clerks close shutters, snuff candles, and lock drawers. The echo of quills fades, replaced by the whisper of night. You picture the letters travelling now across forests and fields, each one a small promise that connection can survive distance. Perhaps both pride and longing lived in this practice. The pride of writing, the longing to be read. You tilt your head toward the wind, half expecting it to carry someone's words to you. Instead, it brings only the faint rattle of carriage wheels far away, a reminder that in this age, even silence must travel slowly. The night sky hangs low over Paris, heavy with clouds that promise rain. You make your way through the narrow alleys behind the square, where the air smells of wax, coal, and roasted chestnuts. The hum of the city quiets here, broken only by the rhythmic creak of a carriage in the distance. Ahead, a row of windows glows faintly with candlelight. This is the edge of the artisan quarter, where craftsmen and artists work through the dark hours, shaping beauty from exhaustion. In the margins of forgotten notebooks kept by painters, there are small sketches of hands, tools, and half-finished dreams. They show a world where art was not luxury, but livelihood, where brush and chisel were as necessary as bread. A journeyman might spend years copying the same design until his own imagination dared to speak. You peer into a workshop where a sculptor works under a single candle. His arms are dusted white with marble powder, his movements steady and patient. The figure before him is only half-formed, yet its eyes already hold a spark of life. The silence around him feels like reverence. Country grandmothers used to say that artists stole a piece of their soul each time they finished a portrait. You smile at the superstition, but looking at the sculptor now, you wonder if they were right. His gaze is fierce and tender at once, as though he truly is leaving something behind in stone. In another room, a seamstress bends over a gown made of silk so pale it seems to glow in the dim light. Her fingers move like water, stitching pearls into a pattern that only she will know. Beside her sits a pot of tea gone cold, and a pile of rejected fabric waiting for another chance. The air hums with concentration, the kind that turns ordinary work into prayer. Travellers who visited France in those years often wrote about the beauty of craft found even in poverty. A cabinet carved with care, a painted box, a shoe repaired so neatly that its patch became part of the design. They saw in these details the quiet genius of people who created with nothing but patience and need. Farmhands joked that when a craftsman worked late, the night spirits lent him their hands. That belief feels fitting as you watch a printer's apprentice feed pages through a press. The machine sighs and clatters, and each new sheet emerges, inked with letters still wet and shining. Words appear, ghosts of thought captured on paper. The boy stacks them carefully, proud as if they were gold. A painter nearby wipes his brush on his sleeve and sighs. The canvas before him shows a narrow street, lanterns reflected in rain. He steps back, frowns, then dips the brush again, lost in the endless argument between what he sees and what he feels. A cat curls beside him, unimpressed by genius. Those who lived through that century remembered how art slipped between classes. The nobility paid for portraits and theatre, but the streets bred their own performers. Puppeteers, singers, and storytellers wandered from corner to corner, keeping imagination alive when money could not. Beauty had no boundaries, only accents. Before sunrise, some families would quietly place their children's drawings under pillows, believing the images might bring pleasant dreams. You think of that as the painter finally sets down his brush, stretching his back, satisfied for now. Maybe creation, like sleep, is simply the act of surrendering control. Objects unearthed from cellars tell another story. Fragments of pottery glazed with symbols, scraps of tapestry, half-burnt sheet music. Even the smallest things carry traces of devotion. The artists of the century are long gone, but their fingerprints remain, pressed invisibly into the world. Researchers who study material culture see this as proof that creativity belonged to everyone, not just those born to privilege. Yet others remind us that most names vanished with the smoke of their candles. The city admired art but forgot its makers. Standing here among the shadows, you feel both truths resting together like layers of dust. A musician begins to play in the courtyard outside, the tune gentle and slow. His violin sighs against the quiet, filling the air with something too delicate for words. Windows open one by one, and faces appear, drawn by the sound. Even fatigue seems to pause. Perhaps the mystery is what keeps it alive, the way creation binds loneliness and wonder into the same thread. The sculptor wipes his hands, the seamstress snuffs her candle, and the violin fades into silence. For a brief moment, you sense the heartbeat of the city pulsing through every craft, every hand, every dream still unfinished. The smell of rain still lingers as the morning opens on a quieter street. The cobblestones shimmer faintly, and puddles mirror fragments of sky. You turn a corner and find yourself in front of a school for the sons of merchants and clerks. The gate creaks as you push it open, revealing a courtyard scattered with fallen leaves, and boys in blue coats reciting lessons from memory. The air smells of ink, leather bindings, and chalk dust. A brief line in a teacher's journal captures it perfectly. The discipline of learning was as much a matter of posture as of thought. Students sat with their backs straight, their eyes down, and their hands folded, as if knowledge required stillness. The master's rod leaned quietly against his desk, both warning and promise. Inside, the classroom is dim, lit by the narrow light of a single window. Rows of children murmur Latin verbs in unison. The rhythm of their voices feels almost musical, a chant to keep weariness at bay. One boy stumbles on a word, and the others glance up, half sympathetic, half relieved that the mistake was not theirs. They used to say it softly, as if the walls could hear. A boy who studies by candlelight steals wisdom from the angels. You glance toward the corner, where a few worn candles flicker beside open books. Their flames bend as the draught moves through the room, and for a moment, you can almost believe the old saying. The teacher paces slowly, his robe brushing the floor. His voice carries a faint rasp from years of repeating the same lessons. He writes on the board with chalk that squeals against the wood, each letter deliberate and curved like a signature. The smell of dust rises as he erases it with his sleeve. If you watched long enough, you would notice the peculiar rule that boys stood when reciting even the smallest answer. It was a ritual of respect, a way to make thought visible. The youngest tremble slightly as they speak. The older ones deliver their lines with rehearsed confidence. Knowledge here is learned through rhythm and fear in equal measure. Those who passed through such classrooms later remembered both pride and exhaustion. They spoke of the endless copying of texts, the ink-stained fingers, and the stiff silence broken only by the scratching of quills. Yet they also recalled the thrill of understanding, that brief light, when a difficult passage finally made sense. A fireside tale passed from neighbour to neighbour told that teachers who fell asleep at their desks were haunted by the ghosts of unwritten lessons. You smile at the image of weary masters, dreaming of unfinished grammar. The tale might have been a jest, but it speaks to the relentlessness of this world, learning as a calling that never truly ends. Travellers visiting France in those years were often struck by the country's devotion to order and manners. They found that the same discipline in classrooms echoed in government offices and even in kitchens. Children raised to recite politely would grow into adults who bowed correctly and wrote their names with flourish. The entire nation seemed to believe that elegance began with obedience. An engraving on an old slate board shows two boys sharing one book, their heads nearly touching. The detail is small but tender, hinting at the quiet companionship hidden beneath formality. Friendship blooms easily among those who suffer the same rules. Researchers tracing the pattern now see echoes of change rather than certainty. Some claim that education prepared the people for enlightenment, giving them the language to question authority. Others argue it merely replaced old ignorance with new discipline. Perhaps both are true. Every rule contains its rebellion in seed form. At midday, the boys file out into the courtyard for their meal. The air is filled with chatter and the rustle of paper. They sit on benches, breaking their bread in silence at first, then laughing once the teacher turns his back. Laughter here feels like sunlight sneaking through a cloud. A young apprentice offers you a piece of apple, and you accept, tasting its tart sweetness. Around you, the children toss crumbs to the sparrows, hopping along the wall. Their laughter grows louder now, untamed for a moment before the bell calls them back inside. You linger as the gates close, the sound of lessons resuming behind the wall. The rhythm of their voices fades into the hum of the city. You imagine them years later, grown and scattered, some to shops, some to courts, some to dreams they could barely name. Facts dissolve, but the scent of chalk and wax lingers long after the ink dries. You walk away slowly, realizing that the true education of the century was not confined to schools at all. It lived in the discipline of attention, in the act of looking closely and listening fully, a skill, as rare then as it is now. The morning air smells of yeast and sugar. You follow the sound of laughter until the narrow street opens into a small square where bakers, butchers, and sellers of sweets have gathered their stalls. A woman with flour on her apron waves you closer, inviting you to taste a pastry shaped like a tiny crown. The golden crust flakes beneath your fingers, and the steam that escapes smells like butter and almonds. An eyewitness could have stood where you are now and seen the same thing. The marketplace in 18th century France was a theatre of appetite. Food was display, gesture, and performance. Housewives argued over prices. Children begged for sticky fingers of honey, and old men lingered beside barrels of wine to debate which vintage could make a saint sing. The baker tells you that his dough rests twice, once for patience and once for prayer. He taps the counter as he speaks, dust rising in soft clouds. Behind him, a boy carries trays of brioche still warm from the oven. The scent is dizzying, thick and sweet, and you feel the city's hunger settle like music in your chest. They used to say in the villages that a loaf should never be cut before it cooled, or the bread would remember the impatience and turn bitter. You think of that as you watch the baker hand a roll to a child who cannot wait, tearing it open and burning his fingers with joy. Sometimes superstition is only wisdom wearing an apron. Travellers of the time were astonished by the inventiveness of French kitchens. From grand chateaux to humble inns, cooks transformed scarcity into art. A pot of broth might stretch for days, thickened with herbs, bones, or whatever could be spared. Even the poorest house kept a spoon of spice hidden for feast days. Cooking was memory set to flame. If you watched long enough, you'd notice the peculiar rule that bakers never whistled at their work. The reason, they said, was simple. Bread needed quiet to rise. You listen now to the rhythm of kneading, the thump and fold of dough against wood, the hiss of loaves entering the oven. The sound is gentle and constant, like breathing. From letters exchanged among merchants, it appears that recipes travelled faster than politics. One week a city gossiped about royal decrees, the next it debated the proper way to season a stew. Even in an age of hunger, taste remained a kind of freedom. To season was to choose, and choice was a luxury. Before sunrise someone always did it. A baker crossing himself before lighting the first fire, a gesture so small it vanished in the heat. The ovens glowed like the hearts of small suns, turning raw dough into promise. Watching the firelight flicker across the baker's face, you understand why so many saw the kitchen as the most sacred room in a house. An old saying repeated in wine shops claimed that no one ever truly knew their neighbour until they shared a meal. You can feel the truth of it now as strangers at nearby stalls exchange bread and laughter without names. Food unites where politics divides. The smell of roasting meat and warm sugar carries over the chatter, drawing even the quietest souls closer. The parchment still smells faintly of smoke, yet it tells how cooks in royal kitchens experimented endlessly, adding sugar to sauces, blending foreign spices, shaping new delicacies that shocked and delighted. It was innovation by instinct, not rule. What survived of those inventions now fills the very idea of French taste. Modern historians approach this moment cautiously, aware that food reveals the structure of a nation. Some see cuisine as a mirror of hierarchy, built on invisible labour. Others view it as art born of constraint, a kind of edible philosophy. Looking around at the busy square, both ideas seem alive. Every crumb tells a story of power and survival. The afternoon grows warm, and the vendors call louder. You buy a tart of plums glazed in syrup, its crust breaking softly under your teeth. The sweetness catches you off guard, rich and fleeting. Around you, the sounds of knives on wood and laughter mingle like harmony. A priest passes, blessing the baker's hands before continuing his round. One of them bows, another rolls his eyes when the priest is gone. Faith, like yeast, rises differently for everyone. You step away at last, your stomach full, and your thoughts gentler. Behind you, the square keeps singing its low song of trade and hunger, a melody that never quite ends. You imagine the same sounds drifting into tomorrow, carried by the smell of bread cooling on a wooden shelf. The day feels human in the simplest, truest way, sustenance, shared and fleeting, enough to keep the world turning one more time. The day drifts toward afternoon, sunlight pooling in corners of the square. The noise of the market fades behind you as you wander into a quieter street lined with small workshops. Here, glassworkers, watchmakers, and goldsmiths shape time and light for a living. The smell of metal, oil, and hot dust fills the air. Every window reveals a small miracle in progress. Someone once wrote to a friend about this very sight, describing the beauty of patience. Craftsmanship was the silent engine of the century, measured not in hours but in heartbeats. A single watch might take weeks to perfect, each gear smoothed and coaxed until it moved without resistance. Time, it seems, had to be built by hand before it could be measured. Inside one workshop, a watchmaker hunches over a magnifying glass, his eye bright and sharp as a needle. His tools lie in neat rows, gleaming faintly in the half-light. You can hear the faint tick of a finished piece resting nearby, steady and calm. It sounds like eternity in miniature. Every child in the parish knew the rhyme that warned, "A broken clock remembers better than the living." You smile at the dark humour of it, yet you feel the truth behind the words. Objects, unlike people, cannot lie about how they've been used. Each scratch on a dial, each faded number tells its story honestly. A jeweler next door polishes a ring with a scrap of cloth until it shines like morning dew. She hums quietly, her movements precise. Around her wrists hang thin threads of gold that catch the light when she lifts her hand. On a shelf nearby sits a small box of stones, each one labelled in cramped handwriting. Their colours flash like secret languages. Travellers who visited France in that century often marvelled at the attention to beauty in the smallest things. Even an ordinary clasp or buckle carried grace. They claimed that this devotion to detail gave the country its peculiar charm, a belief that order itself could be art. The market women liked to tease that a goldsmith's child was born with metal in its blood. You think of that as the jeweler adjusts her spectacles and continues working, her expression calm and unreadable. The shine of her creation reflects briefly in her eyes, a spark of pride that will vanish once the piece leaves her hands. If you stay long enough, you begin to notice the rhythm of these rooms. Hammer, breath, silence, file, polish, pause. The repetition becomes music, soothing in its steadiness. No one rushes. Each gesture carries the weight of tradition, learned by imitation, passed down through countless apprenticeships. An engraving from the period shows the same posture again and again. Bodies bent, faces intent, hands shaping what cannot be seen until it is finished. It is an image of devotion, though not the kind sung about in church. The sacred here lives in precision. Researchers who study the economy of the time still debate whether craft saved families or enslaved them. Some call it freedom through skill, others exhaustion, disguised as pride. You can almost hear that argument in the silence of this room. The craftsman wipes his brow, sighs, and returns to work, his loyalty divided between necessity and perfection. Before sunset, apprentices appear carrying trays of completed work to be sold in the nearby arcades. They joke softly, balancing delicate pieces on their palms. A girl trips slightly and laughs when her mentor steadies her arm. For a moment, the seriousness of labour dissolves into simple youth. You step outside again, the air cooler now. The smell of oil has faded into evening smoke. The bells of a nearby church begin to ring, slow and clear. Each note seems to echo the ticking of the clocks inside the shops. Time layered upon time, sound folding over sound. Was it progress, or simply another shape of survival? The answer shifts with every retelling. You watch the last of the apprentices close the shutters, and the glow of lamplight fades behind the glass. The street falls quiet, except for the faint whisper of gears still turning somewhere unseen. The city exhales softly, wrapped in the patient heartbeat of its makers. You walk away through the gathering dusk, the memory of ticking following like a pulse beneath the skin, steady and human. The first chill of autumn curls through the narrow streets, brushing against your face like a sigh. You follow the smell of smoke until it leads you toward the edge of the city, where small cottages cluster together beside a shallow canal. The rooftops glisten with dew, and thin threads of chimney smoke rise into the pale morning sky. Inside these modest homes, warmth is a daily pursuit, an art made from scraps. A merchant's letter tucked in a drawer still tells us that fuel was wealth in its own right. Wood cost more than many could spare, and every winter brought quiet dread. Families saved even broken furniture to burn when frost came. Those who could not afford wood learned to make heat from cleverness, layering straw, rags, and faith against the cold. You pause outside a small cottage where an old woman bends over a stove built from bricks and hope. The fire crackles softly, its glow barely enough to fill the room. She hums a tune that seems older than memory, stirring a pot of soup so thin you can see the bottom. Yet the smell is rich, the fragrance of survival made edible. They whispered it by firelight, half serious, half amused. If you spoke kindly to the flames, they would burn brighter. The superstition lingers here, alive in her soft voice. You listen as she murmurs something that could be words or simply rhythm, and the fire responds with a small burst of light. Perhaps belief itself adds warmth when wood runs low. At a nearby window, a boy presses his fingers to the glass, watching frost patterns bloom like lace. His breath fogs the pain, and he traces shapes with a fingertip, circles, stars, letters. Behind him, his father mends a chair leg, the sound of scraping wood, steady and patient. The family lives inside a world of small rituals that keep despair at arm's length. Nurses in village kitchens used to warn children that if they drew hearts on the frost, love would visit before spring. The boy laughs when his sister scolds him for trying. Their laughter fills the room, fragile yet alive, like a candle in wind. The notes of a parish scribe hint quietly that winters grew harsher toward the century's end. Poorer families huddled together for warmth, sometimes moving from house to house each week to share what little heat remained. Fires burned longer but thinner, leaving smoke to settle heavy in the lungs. The smell of damp soot became the scent of survival. Watch long enough, and you'll see someone still repeating it, an old man closing every shutter before dark, convinced it keeps warmth from escaping. Habits like this became law in cold months, not written but obeyed by instinct. Even silence had its uses. Breath alone could warm a small space if enough hearts shared it. Travelers who ventured through the countryside described nights when frost crept over sleeping faces. They told of inns so cold that water froze inside jugs, of frozen boots standing upright by the hearth. And yet, in every account, there is laughter too, people telling stories to keep their teeth from chattering, songs rising from blue lips. Misery sang in key with resilience. The wear on a wooden step proves more than any decree ever could. Thousands of feet once passed across thresholds like this, carrying buckets of water, bundles of sticks, and hope wrapped in cloth. The grooves under your own feet feel almost alive, carved by generations of motion and memory. Contemporary researchers now read this not as nostalgia but as strategy. They see these nightly routines, boiling soup, sealing doors, tending embers as a social technology, a collective choreography against despair. What looks like simplicity from afar was in truth mastery of endurance. You step outside again, the air crisp and biting. The sky deepens toward evening, and chimneys bloom with new smoke. A dog curls beside a doorway, its fur dusted with ash. You kneel and rub its head. It leans closer, eyes half closed. Warmth shared is warmth multiplied. Perhaps the truth hides not in reason but in rhythm. Every gesture, the turning of wood, the stirring of soup, the soft hum of a song beats like a heart against the cold. You walk back toward the city, and behind you, the cottages flicker with small lights, scattered across the dark, like constellations of endurance. The city wakes beneath a sky the color of pewter. You walk through the mist toward the river again, where barges float motionless and cranes stretch their thin arms above the docks. The air tastes of iron and wet rope. Work begins before light, the rhythm of loading and lifting, echoing like a heartbeat through the fog. The wear on the ropes along the quay tells a story that ink never could. Generations of hands have pulled and tied, leaving fibers smooth as silk from friction and sweat. The harbour was the city's pulse, beating to the rhythm of trade and necessity. Every crate, every barrel, every shout along the dockside measured the tempo of survival. You pause beside a man mending a net. His fingers move with practiced ease, weaving new thread through holes as if restitching time itself. He glances up and nods, then returns to his rhythm, humming under his breath. His song blends with the slap of water against stone, with the cries of gulls wheeling overhead. At the turn of the season, they always did the same curious thing. Before the year's last catch, fishermen would throw one fish back into the river as an offering to whatever power ruled the tides. You see it now, the small, silvery body slipping from calloused fingers into grey water. The ripples vanish quickly, but the gesture feels ancient and sincere. Scraps of testimony from the archives whisper how dock workers created their own laws, older than the crown's. No theft among comrades, no talk with taxmen, and always a portion set aside for widows of those lost at sea. These rules bound them tighter than rope, rules written not on paper but on the heart. Watch long enough, and you'll notice that everything here moves in cycles. Nets are cast, mended, cast again. Crates are loaded, emptied, then filled anew. The tide rises and falls as faithfully as breath. Repetition gives meaning to motion. Without it, the day would unravel. An old harbour saying joked that the river never forgot a face. Sailors spat into the water before each voyage, to be sure it would recognise them when they returned. You smile, imagining the river's memory stretching from one shore to the next, holding everyone it has ever carried. One faded fresco at a chapel corner near the docks shows fishermen kneeling beside their boats, lanterns glowing at their feet. The artist captured the glimmer of devotion in ordinary work, the holiness of effort. Salt and prayer mix freely here, indistinguishable in the air. Scholars mapping these habits find both harmony and resistance in them. They argue that the dockyard, rough and chaotic, mirrored the larger structure of France itself, disciplined yet defiant. To load ships was to serve the system. To invent one's own code within it was to quietly reclaim power. You see their point in every bowed head and squared shoulder. By midday, the fog begins to lift. The smell of fish and pitch thickens, mingling with the sweetness of tarred wood. A boy runs past carrying bread, shouting greetings to the men at work. One throws him a coin. Laughter bursts briefly, bright as sunlight on the water. Even silence had ritual here. Even boredom had rules. When the tide turned, the workers paused, resting on barrels or ropes. No one spoke. It was as if the entire harbour inhaled, waiting for permission to move again. Then, at a single call, motion returned, fast and certain, like the city exhaling. Travellers who wrote about this place often confessed their awe. They saw not grandeur but endurance, not beauty but rhythm, made visible. The harbour, to them, was an orchestra with salt for melody and smoke for harmony. You hear it too, the creak of wood, the splash of water, the steady beat of work, repeated without complaint. Maybe understanding begins only when you stop looking for certainty. The dock, the river, the men, the boats, they exist together like words in an endless sentence. Meaning shifts with each tide. You stand there watching, and for a moment, it feels as if the whole world breathes through the same lung. The afternoon sun glows briefly through the thinning mist. The fishermen call to one another, their voices low but sure. Someone begins another song, this one slower, roughened by wind. The notes linger over the water like threads of smoke, and the river carries them away. The last light of the year slants low across the rooftops, painting the city in copper and shadow. You walk uphill toward the higher quarter, where bells begin to toll in uneven harmony. Their sound rolls through the streets, blending with the murmur of footsteps and the faint rustle of winter wind. The world feels suspended, caught between ending and beginning. Every census line from that year seems to breathe the same unease. Populations shift, prices climb, and whispers of revolt stir even in polite salons. Beneath the beauty of powdered faces and polished boots lies something restless. The century is nearing its close, and though no one can name it yet, change hangs in the air like electricity before a storm. Along the street, people hurry toward the cathedral. The glow of candles spills through open doors, flooding the square with trembling light. The smell of wax and pine fills the air. A choir begins to sing inside, their voices rising like smoke through cold air. You pause, listening, the sound wrapping around you until it feels less like song and more like memory. Superstition clung to daily life like the scent of smoke to wool. Many still believed that attending the final service of the year erased misfortune. Some brought sprigs of rosemary or coins to bless. Others whispered secret vows beneath their breath. The line between ritual and hope blurred easily here, softened by candlelight. Inside, the nave glows gold. A priest speaks of gratitude, of endurance, of mercy. The congregation listens, but their eyes drift toward the candles. Fire seems more convincing than words. You notice a woman holding her child close, his small fingers tracing the edge of a hymn book. The quiet between each note feels sacred. A cracked plate unearthed near the river holds the memory of its owner's meal, and you think suddenly of kitchens across the city, humble or grand, preparing feasts for the night. Laughter, quarrels, prayers, and secrets all simmer together behind closed shutters. The smell of roasting meat mingles with incense, and somewhere a cork pops. Joy has many disguises. Watch long enough, and you will see the same motion repeated again and again. Hands lighting candles, hands raising glasses, hands resting briefly on other hands. For a moment, every gesture holds peace. The world, even in its tension, pauses to breathe. Scholars studying these closing decades still disagree on how clearly people sensed the tremor beneath their feet. Some argue they felt the coming storm. Others believe they clung to routine precisely to deny it. Perhaps both are right. Stability often performs most convincingly when it is already cracking. The streets outside the church shimmer with frost. Children chase one another through the cold, their laughter bright and echoing against the stones. Vendors shout half-heartedly, selling roasted nuts and cheap wine. The smell drifts through the air, sweet and smoky. Someone nearby plays a flute, a slow melody that trembles like a sigh. You wander to the top of a small bridge and lean against the railing. Below you, the river glows with reflected light. Lanterns float gently downstream, candles set adrift for the dead and the absent. Each one carries a wish, a name, a secret apology. You watch until the last flicker disappears into darkness. It could be that memory is wiser than evidence. The city beneath you has changed countless times, yet its pulse remains the same. The same footsteps, the same laughter, the same hunger, and forgiveness. The details shift, but the rhythm endures. As midnight nears, the bells begin again, deep and solemn. The sound rolls through the valleys and climbs the hills, touching every window. People pause, glasses raised, faces tilted toward the sound. For one breathless instant, the noise of the city disappears, replaced by silence so complete it feels like the world holding itself still. You close your eyes. The air is sharp with cold, but warmth lingers in the light of the candles scattered below. You think of the washerwomen by the river, the bakers in their glowing ovens, the servants clearing dishes, the artists painting through the night, all of them alive in this same moment, their stories overlapping like stars in one vast constellation. Perhaps that is the quiet gift of history, not lessons or warnings, but presence, to know that others have walked this same road, have hoped and feared as you do now. You breathe deeply, feeling the city's heartbeat slow. The bells fade, and the night settles. The wind-down begins. Words stretch longer, softer. The streets blur into silver mist, the sounds of the world dimming, until only the whisper of the river remains. You imagine the warmth of bread cooling on a windowsill, the hush of footsteps fading into snow, the sigh of a candle at its last breath. Sleep gathers at the edges of thought. The century closes like a book, its pages curling gently shut. You stand once more in the quiet heart of France, where every voice has joined the same long song of life. The air is still, the stars steady. You breathe once more, and let the silence hold you. Sweet dreams.